Hey guys, tonight we embark on a voyage across the immense, shimmering expanse of the Pacific Ocean, not in a modern liner, but in the minds and vessels of some of history's most astonishing navigators, the Polynesian wayfinders. Imagine, for a moment, you're out there, nothing but an endless horizon of deep blue water in every direction, the sun beating down, and your destination is a tiny speck of land hundreds, maybe thousands of miles away, a place you've perhaps only heard of in song. No GPS, no compass as we know it, not even a sextant for a good long while. Frankly, armed with only your modern wits and maybe an inflatable flamingo, you probably wouldn't survive this for more than a few days without a serious rethink of your life choices. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead and post your location and local time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Feel the gentle sway, not of a boat just yet, but of the vastness opening up before your mind's eye. The Pacific Ocean Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, as some Maori traditions call it, the Great Ocean of Kiwa. It's a name that breathes with a sense of its sheer scale, and for good reason. This isn't just any body of water. It's the largest single geographical feature on our planet, covering more than 60 million square miles. That's more than a third of the Earth's entire surface, a liquid continent of unimaginable proportions, cradling tens of thousands of islands, many of them mere pinpricks of green against an overwhelming canvas of blue. You can try to picture it, this expanse. Imagine looking out from a high cliff on a remote island, and all you see, stretching to every conceivable edge of your vision, is water. Water that shimmers under a tropical sun. Water that turns a deep, velvety indigo as twilight approaches. Water that can churn with the fury of a storm or lie as flat and reflective as a sheet of polished obsidian. It's within this immense, liquid wilderness that the Polynesian people achieved some of the most remarkable feats of exploration and settlement in human history. Over centuries, their voyaging canoes, masterpieces of Stone Age technology, became the threads that wove together a vast oceanic tapestry, connecting islands separated by truly daunting distances. Think about the challenge. It's one thing to explore a coastline, always keeping land in sight, a comforting, earthy anchor to your senses. It's quite another to push out into the open ocean, where your island home shrinks behind you until it's swallowed by the curve of the earth, and your destination is a promise, a story, a memorized sequence of subtle signs. These weren't just casual jaunts. The settlement of Polynesia, from the western hubs like Fiji, Samoa, and Tonga, eastwards to the Marquesas, Hawaii, Rapa Nui, Easter Island, and south to Aotearoa, New Zealand, represents the last great wave of human migration into habitable, yet previously unoccupied, territories. This expansion, covering an enormous triangle of the Pacific, was accomplished by people with no written language in the way we understand it, no metal tools, and certainly no satellite navigation. Imagine your phone dies and your only backup navigation system is a well-trained seabird and a specific type of cloud formation that looks a bit like your Uncle Barry after a large lunch. Slightly different risk assessment to forgetting where you parked the car, isn't it? The driving forces behind these epic voyages were likely complex, perhaps population pressure, a search for new resources, internal conflicts, or simply the sheer spirit of adventure, the call of the horizon. Historians still argue whether the initial long-distance settlement patterns were primarily driven by accidental drift voyages, where canoes were blown off course, or by deliberate, targeted exploration, meticulously planned and executed. The truth, as it often is, probably lies in a combination of both, with accidental discoveries perhaps paving the way for more intentional follow-up voyages once word got back of new lands. When early European explorers like Captain Cook encountered these island societies in the 18th century, they were often astonished. Here were people living on tiny, isolated specks of land, thousands of miles from any continent, yet possessing shared cultural traits, languages, and even plant and animal species that spoke of regular, or at least historical, contact across these vast distances. A quirky little tidbit is that some Polynesian oral traditions describe the islands themselves not as static landmasses that were simply found, but as having been fished up, from the depths by heroic or divine ancestors, like the demigod Maui with his magical fishhook. It's a wonderfully poetic way to describe discovery, as if the islands themselves were actively brought into the world of the living, beckoned from the ocean's embrace. It also subtly underscores the idea that the ocean wasn't just a void to be crossed, but a realm full of potential, a place from which new worlds could emerge. The secrets we're going to delve into tonight are not about complex machinery or arcane mathematics scribbled on charts. They are about a profound, intimate relationship with the natural world, a level of observation so keen it borders on what many of us, glued to our screens and divorced from the rhythms of nature, might consider almost supernatural. But it wasn't magic. It was knowledge, painstakingly accumulated over generations, passed down through chants, stories, and rigorous practical training. It was about reading the language of the ocean swells, the subtle shifts in wind, the flight paths of birds, the telltale glow of distant lagoons reflected on the underside of clouds, and the silent, unerring guidance of the stars. It's honestly a wonder they ever found their way back for a forgotten item, let alone a whole new island chain. I can barely find my keys half the time, and they're usually within a 20-foot radius, not 2,000 miles across open water. So, as you settle deeper into your pillows, let the image of that vast, starlit ocean fill your mind. Feel the immense, quiet space around you. This isn't a history of grand empires clashing, or of noisy, metallic inventions changing the world overnight. This is a quieter story, a story of human ingenuity in its most organic form, of courage, and of an almost unbelievable attunement to the gentle, persistent signals of the planet. It's the story of how to find your way in the world using nothing but your senses, your memory, and the wisdom of those who came before you. The true marvel is how these wayfinders made the seemingly impossible, routinely possible, turning the great, intimidating Pacific into their home, their highway, and their sacred space. And so, you find yourself afloat on this conceptual ocean, understanding the scale of the journeys these ancient mariners undertook. The most vital piece of equipment they carried, more precious than any carefully constructed canoe or painstakingly carved paddle, was something entirely unseen, held within the quiet confines of their own minds. We speak of the Wayfinder's Mind Palace, a term we might use today, but for them it was a living, breathing repository of generations of oceanic wisdom, a mental map far more dynamic and detailed than any piece of paper you could ever unroll. Forget about neatly drawn coastlines or little compass roses. Their charts were woven from starlight, ocean currents, the flight of birds, and the ancient rhythm of epic poems and chants. Imagine trying to store the blueprint of an entire ocean, not in a computer, but in your memory. It wasn't about memorizing a static picture. Their mental maps were multisensory and experiential. They knew the feel of a certain swell as it passed under the hull, the specific scent carried on the wind from a particular island, the subtle change in water temperature, the way the stars rose and set over specific unseen landfalls. This information was the bedrock of their survival and their ability to connect worlds. We're talking about an encyclopedic knowledge of hundreds of star paths, the complex behavior of ocean swells as they refracted around islands or shoals, the seasonal patterns of winds and bird migrations, and the locations, both real and sometimes legendary, of countless islands, each with its unique environmental signature. This vast corpus of knowledge was meticulously passed down through oral tradition, which is a mainstream historical fact acknowledged by all who study Polynesian cultures. Epic chants, some taking days to recite, were not just stories of gods and heroes. They were also incredibly sophisticated mnemonic devices. Within the verses, hidden like pearls and oysters, were precise navigational instructions, star compasses, genealogies that traced routes of migration, and detailed descriptions of islands. The Kumalipo, the Hawaiian creation chant, for instance, is a genealogical prayer that lists thousands of ancestors and natural phenomena, and within its poetic structure, many scholars see echoes of ancient voyages and observations about the natural world, a sort of ancestral database. The rhythm and melody of the chant would aid memory, making it easier for a young apprentice to absorb and retain colossal amounts of information. They're memorizing hundreds of star island alignments, the subtle differences between 8 or more distinct ocean swells, and I sometimes walk into a room and forget entirely why I went in there. Different skill sets, clearly. The training of a wayfinder or navigator priest, as they were sometimes known in certain island groups, often began in childhood. An elder, a seasoned navigator, would take a promising youngster under their tutelage. These weren't classroom lessons with textbooks and exams. Learning happened on the lagoon, then on short inter-island trips, and eventually on the open ocean itself. The apprentice would spend years, even decades, observing, listening, feeling, and memorizing. They learned to lie down in the hull of the canoe to better sense the subtle interactions of different wave patterns, to identify stars by their color, their brightness, their relationship to other stars, and the precise point on the horizon where they would rise and set. There's a fascinating concept from Micronesian navigation, which, while distinct, shares many underlying principles with Polynesian techniques, known as attack. This is a particularly quirky and ingenious mental construct. To gauge distance and maintain a sense of position relative to islands that were out of sight, the navigator would visualize a reference island, one that was not the destination but lay off to one side of the course, as moving backwards underneath the canoe as they progressed. The journey was divided into segments based on the changing perceived position of this moving reference island relative to landmarks in the stars. It's a dynamic, abstract system that allowed for a surprisingly accurate understanding of one's place in the void. Some accounts also suggest that highly experienced Polynesian navigators developed such an attunement to their environment that they could almost feel the presence of an island beyond the horizon, perhaps sensing minute changes in swell patterns, distant reflections, or even subtle atmospheric disturbances that are beyond our everyday perception. It's a kind of sixth sense born from a lifetime of deep immersion. Scholars continue to explore the precise cognitive mechanisms that allowed wayfinders to construct and manipulate these vast mental databases, especially regarding how abstract concepts like the pattern of refracted swells around an island you cannot yet see were encoded, stored, and then accurately recalled under the pressures of a long voyage. Was it purely rote memorization, or did they develop unique spatial reasoning skills, a kind of three-dimensional mental modeling that allowed them to visualize complex environmental interactions? Their internal GPS didn't need satellite updates, just a good night's sleep and perhaps a calming chant to clear the mental cache before the next day's calculations. It's a testament to the brain's astonishing plasticity and its capacity for storing and processing information in ways we are still only beginning to understand. This knowledge wasn't just a collection of isolated data points. It was a holistic, interconnected system. A particular star path would be associated with a certain wind, which was expected at a specific time of year, and which, in turn, would generate a known swell pattern that could lead you towards an island heralded by a particular species of bird. Everything was linked. The navigator wasn't just recalling facts. They were reading a living narrative told by the ocean and the sky. You can almost picture the scene. The wayfinder, perhaps an older, weathered individual, sitting calmly at the stern of the voyaging canoe, eyes scanning the horizon, or sometimes closed, accessing that intricate map within. They are feeling the pulse of the ocean through the timber of the vessel, listening to the song of the wind in the rigging of the pandanus mat sail, their mind a silent, smoothly functioning engine of observation and deduction. There was, of course, immense responsibility. No pressure, though. Just the entire community, your family, your friends, perhaps the future of your people, relying on your flawless mental recall and judgment to find, a habitable piece of land. And perhaps, just as importantly, dinner. But this burden was carried with a quiet confidence, born from that deep, almost sacred, understanding. Their mind was not just a storehouse of information, but a finely tuned instrument, constantly recalibrating, constantly sifting through the subtle clues the environment provided. It was this internal compass, this living library of oceanic knowledge, that truly powered their voyages into the unknown, long before the first star even pricked the twilight sky to offer its more visible guidance. So, with this incredible mental library meticulously cataloged and cross-referenced, the Wayfinder had the software, so to speak. Now, let's look at one of the primary sources of their data input, the celestial guides shimmering in the velvet expanse of the night sky. When the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the western sky in fleeting hues of orange and purple, another, more ancient map would unfold above. a breathtaking panorama of stars, so numerous and brilliant in the unpolluted air of the open Pacific that they must have felt close enough to touch. For you, lying there, eyes gently closed, imagine that canopy, not just as a beautiful spectacle, but as your most reliable chart, your most steadfast compass. The fundamental principle is one we learn as children. Stars, like the sun, generally rise in the east and set in the west. But the Polynesian wayfinders took this basic observation to an extraordinary level of precision. They understood that each star has its own specific rising point on the eastern horizon and its own setting point on the western horizon. These points remain remarkably consistent throughout the year for any given star. This is the mainstream historical fact at the heart of their celestial navigation. They memorized the precise rising and setting points of hundreds of stars. Some accounts suggest knowledge of up to 200, even 300 individual stars and their behaviors. By identifying these points, they effectively created a star compass, a mental circle of direction dividing the entire horizon into as many as 32 distinct directional points, each marked by a specific star or constellation at its rising or setting. Picture yourself on the deck of the Kaulua, the double-hulled voyaging canoe, as night deepens. The only sounds are the gentle creak of the timbers, the whisper of wind in the sail, and the soft rush of water along the hulls. To maintain your course, you would align the canoe with a star that you knew, from generations of accumulated wisdom, would rise or set over your target island, or over a point on the invisible path leading to it. As that star climbed higher in the sky and its guiding power for that specific bearing diminished, you would seamlessly switch to another star in a known sequence, one that was just rising or about to set on the same bearing, or a nearby one if a slight course correction was needed. It's like having a celestial sat-nav, but the guiding voice is the universe itself, speaking in the silent, ancient language of starlight. And the best part? No annoying recalculating route messages, just serene, unwavering guidance. Beyond these directional stars, there was another crucial category: zenith stars. A zenith star is one that, at some point in its journey across the sky, passes directly overhead through your zenith. The profound importance of this lies in a simple astronomical truth. A specific star will only pass directly overhead at a specific latitude on Earth. So, if you knew that a particular star, let's say Arcturus or Sirius, passed directly over your home island, then sailing north or south until that star culminated precisely above your canoe at night meant you had reached the correct latitude of your home. Finding your latitude, your north-south position, was often the first major step in locating an island. Once on the right latitude, you could then sail east or west along that line, watching for other signs of land. The way children were often taught these celestial maps is a rather charming and quirky tidbit. Elders might have them lie on their backs on a calm beach at night, looking up at the vast star field. Then, using a long stick, the teacher would trace the patterns of constellations, point out key stars, and recite the chants that encoded their paths and their connections to various islands. The stars weren't just abstract points of light. They were often imbued with character, woven into myths and stories, perhaps seen as ancestors or guardians of specific islands, making their complex movements easier to remember and relate to. You weren't just learning astronomy. You were learning your family history, your cosmology, your place in the universe, all in one go. Of course, the sky is dynamic. Stars don't just pop up and stay put. They arc across the heavens in what are known as star paths. The navigator had to know these paths intimately, how high a star would climb, where it would be at different times of the night, and how its path related to other stars. If clouds obscured a primary guiding star, they could switch to another in the same path or a related constellation. Historians still argue whether the concept of a formalized star compass with precisely equal mathematical divisions, like our 360-degree system, was a pan-Polynesian system, or if regional variations emphasize different stellar phenomena and perhaps more flexible, observational divisions of the horizon based on the most prominent stars visible from their particular latitudes. The systems were likely highly adapted to local conditions and specific voyaging corridors. Imagine trying to get a reliable Wi-Fi signal for your star map app in the middle of the Pacific thousands of years ago. Oh wait, their app was installed directly into their brain, running on pure starlight, updated by nightly observation, and with a battery life that lasted a lifetime. Much more eco-friendly and decidedly less prone to crashing, one would imagine. The navigator also had to account for the changing appearance of the sky throughout the year. Just as we see different constellations dominating our winter or summer skies, so too did the Polynesian wayfinder. Their mental star chart had to incorporate these seasonal shifts, knowing which stars would be their guides in the season of voyaging and which would be absent or unhelpful. The beauty of the stars as navigational aids, especially in the vastness of the Pacific, was their constancy and predictability. Unlike winds that could shift or currents that might vary, the stars held their courses with unwavering precision, night after night, year after year, century after century. They were the ultimate anchor, the celestial bedrock upon which the entire system of wayfinding was built. Of course, if it was cloudy for weeks on end, well, that's when you really hoped you'd paid close attention during the advanced swell interpretation and bird flight pattern analysis modules of your extensive training. Or, at the very least, had been particularly diligent in packing extra preserved breadfruit and dried fish. The stars were their silent, shimmering companions, guiding them across the dark, sleeping waters, offering a pathway to unseen shores, a luminous thread connecting them to home and to their destination. And as these stellar guides began to fade with the first hint of dawn, another celestial body would prepare to take over the watch. As the last of those reliable, twinkling stellar guides begin to pale against the approaching dawn, you feel a subtle shift in the air, a growing luminescence in the eastern sky. Then, with a slow, majestic grace, the sun itself begins its ascent, spilling gold and rose across the calm surface of the ocean. Its warmth on your skin is a welcome sensation after the cool of the night. For the Polynesian wayfinder, this daily spectacle wasn't just a beautiful sunrise. It was the arrival of their primary daytime compass, a fiery orb that would trace a predictable, though ever-shifting, path across the sky, offering crucial directional clues. While the stars provided a fixed map during the hours of darkness, the sun was the daytime workhorse. The wayfinders possessed a profound understanding of its movements, and this is a key mainstream historical fact. They meticulously observed and memorized the sun's changing rising and setting positions along the horizon throughout the entire year. They knew that the sun doesn't just pop up due east every day. Its rising and setting points travel north and south along the horizon in a slow annual rhythm. It reaches its northernmost rising and setting points around the June solstice, and its southernmost points around the December solstice. Only around the equinoxes in March and September does it rise due east and set due west. Knowing these solstitial and equinoctial points for their specific latitudes and all the intermediate positions was absolutely vital. So, as you watched the sun break the horizon, you'd carefully note its bearing. If you knew, for instance, that at this particular time of year, the sun should be rising at a point that corresponds to, say, east-northeast on your mental star compass, you could orient yourself accordingly. As it climbed higher, its path across the sky, its arc, became your guide. You'd observe its trajectory, judging its height and bearing relative to the canoe's heading. The sun, bless its fiery heart, isn't quite as straightforward as those obliging, pinpoint stars. It likes to wander north and south along the horizon during the year, like a celestial diva making sure you're paying very close attention to its grand entrances and exits each day. This seasonal drift meant your internal calculations had to be constantly updated. Throughout the daylight hours, you'd continue to monitor the sun's progress. Its highest point in the sky, local apparent noon, was a particularly important moment. In the tropics, the sun passes very high overhead, sometimes directly at the zenith. By observing its position at noon, a skilled navigator could get a good sense of their north-south line, and potentially even an estimation of their latitude, though doing so with high accuracy without instruments is a complex skill. This information was crucial for confirming or adjusting the course set by the stars the previous night, or the course they intended to take when the stars reappeared. As a quirky little tidbit, while they didn't have sextants for precise measurements, some navigators may have used their own hand, fingers, or a simple, perhaps specially marked, unbent stick, a sort of rudimentary sun stick, held at arm's length to make estimations. They might measure the sun's altitude above the horizon by finger widths, or track how far it moved across the sky in a set period, helping to gauge the passage of time or even confirm their latitude if they knew, for instance, that at a certain island at noon on a specific day, the sun should be 3 finger widths north of directly overhead. These weren't precision tools in the modern sense, but rather aids to their deeply ingrained observational skills, ways to give a bit more structure to what their eyes and instincts were telling them. The subtle color changes in the sky immediately around the sun at dawn and dusk, or the way its light interacted with specific cloud types, could also have offered supplementary clues to the experienced eye. This daytime solar navigation was not a standalone system but worked in seamless partnership with the knowledge of the stars. The sun provided the means to hold a course during the day, to connect the dots between one night's star guiding and the next. When the last guiding star set in the morning, its bearing would be transferred to the rising sun, and in the evening, as the sun dipped, its bearing would be transferred to the first navigational stars appearing in the twilight. There is ongoing discussion among researchers, however, regarding the exact precision with which ancient wayfinders could determine their latitude using only solar observations, particularly without sophisticated instruments to accurately measure the sun's meridian altitude, and how much of their daytime navigation relied on dead reckoning subtly confirmed and adjusted by these solar cues. It's not like they could just ask Siri, "Hey Siri, what's our current latitude based on this rather intense, blinding ball of fire directly above us?" Their internal calculations, honed through years of watching the sun's majestic dance, were a bit more organic, and probably involved fewer third-degree burns from trying to point their delicate electronic devices directly at it. Observing the sun directly is, of course, challenging. Wayfinders likely focused on its position relative to the horizon, cloud features, or perhaps the glare on the water, rather than staring into its brilliant face. They might note the point where its reflection first touched the waves, or where the first ray of light appeared over a distant cloud bank. Beyond its crucial role in direction finding, the sun was, naturally, the source of warmth and light, dictating the rhythm of life aboard the canoe. It dried the dew-soaked sails, warmed chilled bodies, and allowed for tasks like fishing or repairing equipment to be carried out. Its presence was a comfort, a tangible link to the world of light and life, especially when out on the vast, sometimes intimidating, ocean. And, of course, let's not forget the practicalities. The sun was also pretty crucial for drying out your pandanus leaf rain cape or your malo, your loincloth, after an unexpected wave decided to say a very enthusiastic hello. A multitasking celestial body, really. Navigation, warmth, vital for photosynthesis in any plants they carried, and a surprisingly effective laundry service. The full, glorious package. So, as the sun arcs overhead in our story, feel its energy, its power to orient and to sustain. It's a constant, powerful presence, a partner to the stars in the wayfinder's intricate dance with the cosmos. Each sunrise was a reaffirmation of the world's order, each sunset a promise of the stellar map to come. And as the sun moves across the sky, it also interacts with the very surface of the ocean, creating glints and shadows that lead us to the next layer of secrets, those held within the gentle, rhythmic movements of the water itself. As the sun climbs and casts its glittering pathway across the water, your attention, guided by the ancient wayfinder, begins to shift from the vastness above to the equally vast and subtly communicative ocean beneath your vessel. The sea itself is not just a passive surface to be sailed upon. It is a dynamic entity, carrying messages from afar, written in rhythms and pulses that a trained navigator could read with astonishing acuity. We're not talking about the choppy, confused little waves kicked up by the local breeze, the kind that might make your average tourist reach for the ginger biscuits. No, we're delving into something far more profound, something that speaks of immense distances and powerful, unseen forces. The ocean swells. Imagine the Pacific as an enormous, sensitive membrane. Thousands of miles away, a storm might rage for days, its fierce winds pouring colossal energy into the water. Or, in another hemisphere, persistent trade winds blow steadily over thousands of square miles of open ocean. This energy doesn't just stay put. It travels outwards in the form of swells, long, smooth, undulating waves that can journey across entire ocean basins with remarkably little loss of energy or direction. Think of it like dropping a pebble into an immense, perfectly still pond. the ripples spread out, smooth and even, carrying the signature of that initial disturbance. Ocean swells are those ripples, but on a planetary scale. This is the mainstream historical fact that underpins this layer of wayfinding. Polynesian navigators could identify, differentiate, and utilize multiple distinct, long-distance ocean swells, often recognizing at least 4 or 5, sometimes more simultaneously, even when these underlying rhythms were masked by more chaotic, locally generated wind waves on the surface. So, while you might be on deck, perhaps trying to maintain your balance and not turn a particularly interesting shade of green from the immediate surface chop, the real, deep navigational information is being processed by the wayfinder at a much more rhythmic, almost subliminal level. It's as if the ocean has its own ancient heartbeat, a series of overlapping pulses, and these navigators, through years of training, became the incredibly sensitive stethoscopes deciphering its vital signs. They would learn to distinguish, for example, the Kona swell from the south, the north swell rolling down from Alaskan storms, or the persistent trade wind swell from the east, each with its own characteristic period, the time between successive crests, its own typical height, and its own subtle energy. These swells, born of distant weather systems, maintain their direction with remarkable consistency as they traverse the open ocean. A swell generated by a storm in the Southern Ocean, for instance, will travel northwards for thousands of miles, its waves marching in disciplined ranks, a subtle but persistent reminder of its origin. The key for the wayfinder was to learn how to filter out the noise of the local wind waves and tune into these deeper, more reliable signals. The voyaging canoe itself, as we'll explore more later, became an extension of their senses, a tool to feel these underlying movements. They would learn to perceive the gentle lift and fall, the slight corkscrew motion, or the subtle push as different swells passed beneath the hulls. As for a quirky and rather remarkable tidbit about this sensory skill, some seasoned navigators were said to possess such an extraordinary sensitivity that they could detect and analyze these swells by feeling them through specific parts of their bodies, especially when lying very still in the hull of the canoe. Accounts from researchers like David Lewis in the 20th century, who studied with traditional Micronesian navigators whose techniques share common principles, noted that some could discern the minute differences in wave period and direction through, shall we say, an enhanced sensitivity in their lower bodies. They learned to feel these underwater energies with their entire being, some elders even claiming they could detect the most subtle shifts through particular points of contact with the canoe's structure, a true testament to their incredible, almost visceral, attunement to the ocean's language. The initial process of decoding these swells would involve intense concentration and a kind of active listening with the body. The navigator would be constantly assessing, which is the dominant swell? From what direction is it truly coming? What is its period? Are the crests arriving every 10 seconds, every 15? Is there a weaker, underlying swell from another direction? How does the canoe itself respond to each of these? There's considerable discussion among researchers and modern wayfinders about the minimum perceptible amplitude, the smallest height of a swell that a trained navigator could consistently identify and reliably use for orientation, especially when it was significantly masked by those choppier, locally generated wind waves. It likely pushed the very limits of human perception. Your average holidaymaker, bobbing about on a catamaran cruise, might just complain about a bit of a bumpy ride if the sea's up. These navigators, however, were critiquing the ocean's performance like highly experienced art critics examining a complex masterpiece. The dominant westerly swell seems a bit lacking in its usual definition today. Wouldn't you agree? But look, the underlying southerly, though subtle, has a rather promising and consistent cadence, don't you think? That could be useful. This understanding of the prevailing swells, their expected directions and characteristics at different times of the year, formed another crucial layer in their mental map, intricately interwoven with their knowledge of star paths and solar movements. A particular swell might be known to herald the approach to a certain island group, or its absence might indicate being in the shadow of a large landmass. There's something incredibly soothing about the idea of these long, rhythmic ocean swells. They are the deep breaths of the planet, a slow, ponderous rhythm that speaks of immense power and enduring patterns. As you drift off, you can perhaps imagine that gentle, almost imperceptible lifting and falling, a cadence perfectly designed to lull you into a state of deep relaxation. It's the ocean's way of sending a long-distance telegram, written in these vast, flowing ripples. And the wayfinders? They were completely fluent in Wayvelsh. Or perhaps they preferred to communicate in Swahili. Okay, I promise, I'll try to resist the urge to make any more wave-related puns, at least for the next few minutes. This initial, almost intuitive understanding of the ocean's energy, its dominant pulses, was a foundational skill. It was the alphabet of a language that would allow them to read even more complex stories in the water, stories of how these swells bent, reflected, and interacted with the unseen land that lay beyond the horizon, guiding them with ever-increasing precision towards their destination. Having tuned your senses to the fundamental rhythms of the deep ocean swells, those long, sighing breaths of the Pacific we spoke of, you now begin to appreciate how these powerful yet subtle energies do more than just travel in straight lines across the void. Like light or sound, when these ocean swells encounter an object, in this case, an island, they interact with it in revealing ways. The wayfinder, now deeply attuned to the ocean's baseline behavior, is listening for these interactions, these subtle deviations from the norm that whisper of land, often long before any land can actually be seen. It's as if the islands themselves are sending out gentle, watery echoes. The primary way an island announces its presence through swells is by reflection. Imagine a dominant swell, a train of waves marching steadily from the east, encountering the coast of an island. Some of that swell's energy will be absorbed or dissipated as it breaks on the shore or reef. But a portion of it, especially if it meets a steep coastline or a solid reef structure, will bounce off, creating a counterswell that travels back out to sea, often in the opposite direction to the incoming waves. This is a mainstream historical fact and a cornerstone of advanced Polynesian wayfinding. Experienced navigators could detect the presence of an island, sometimes when it was still well over the horizon, potentially 50, 100, or even more miles away, depending on the size of the island and the strength of the swells, by recognizing these reflected wave patterns. So, what are you, as the apprentice wayfinder, feeling for? You're nestled in the hull of the canoe. Perhaps it's the dead of night, and the stars above are your primary guide for direction. But your body is also your wave detector. You've become accustomed to the rhythm of the main swell, that gentle lift and fall from, say, the northeast. Suddenly, you begin to sense a fainter, different rhythm, a subtle pushback, perhaps a slight change in the canoe's motion, indicating a weaker swell coming from the southwest, the direction of your suspected destination. This could be the echo, the reflected signal of the island you are seeking. It's not a dramatic, boat-rocking change, but a nuanced shift in the ocean's texture, a faint countermelody to the main oceanic song. It's like the island is politely whispering, I'm over here, but in a very, very subtle wave language that only these dedicated ocean whisperers, after years of practice, can truly understand. Most of us would probably just think the sea was having a slightly indecisive or lumpy day. Beyond simple reflection, swells also refract, or bend, as they pass the edges of an island or move through shallower water. They can also diffract, spreading out after passing through a channel between two islands or a gap in a reef. These phenomena create characteristic patterns in the water, zones where the sea surface might appear calmer or more confused, or where the dominant swell feels dampened or altered. The wayfinder is alert to all these signs. They might sense a zone of confusion where the incoming swell, a reflected swell, and perhaps a refracted swell are all interacting, creating a more complex, less rhythmic motion in the canoe. This too can signal land. A particularly fascinating quirky tidbit is the idea that different types of coastlines might produce subtly different signatures in the reflected swell patterns. A sheer cliff face might return a sharper, more distinct echo, while a long, gently sloping reef might create a softer, more diffused reflection. It's plausible that a master navigator with decades of experience could learn to distinguish these subtle nuances, giving them clues not just to the presence of land, but potentially to its character before it was ever sighted. Some oral traditions even hint at specific reflected swell patterns being given names, almost like invisible road signs in the vast ocean, guiding the way to a particular island or passage. This ability to read reflected and refracted swells was incredibly important, especially when you were trying to pinpoint a small island target once you knew, from your star or sun navigation, that you were on the correct latitude. You'd sail along that latitude line, effectively scanning with your entire being, waiting for the ocean to tell you that land was near. The maximum distance at which these reflected swells can be reliably detected and distinguished from the background ocean noise by a human observer in a small craft is still a subject of considerable study and sometimes lively debate among researchers and modern navigators. Some historical accounts and oral traditions suggest truly remarkable ranges, feats of perception that sometimes challenge current oceanographic models of wave mechanics, highlighting just how attuned these navigators were. Imagine the profound patience required. You're out there on the seemingly endless ocean, essentially waiting for a tiny, almost imperceptible ripple, an echo that might have taken hours to travel from an unseen shore, to tell you that your destination, your new home, or simply your next landfall, is somewhere over that vast, curved horizon. It's the oceanic equivalent of waiting for a very important text message reply, but the sender is a substantial geological formation, the message is written in water, and the network coverage is, well, waves. Not always 5G, that's for sure. Another key indicator related to an island's effect on swells is the swell shadow or zone of relative calm that can occur on the leeward side of an island, the side sheltered from the dominant swell. If you're sailing along and the prevailing swell you've been feeling for days suddenly diminishes or disappears, it could mean you've entered the calmer waters protected by an island that lies upswell from you. It's like the island is casting a shadow, not of light, but of wave energy. These skills transformed the apparently featureless ocean into a landscape rich with subtle signs and readable topography for those who knew the language. Some people, as the saying goes, can see faces in the clouds. These highly skilled Polynesian navigators, well, they could effectively see detailed survey maps and coastal charts in the way the water was behaving all around them. If only they could have somehow monetized that incredible skill with a prehistoric Find My Island app, they'd undoubtedly have been billionaires. In beautifully polished seashells and finely woven mats, of course. The sensitivity required to detect these gentle wave echoes is truly astounding. It's a testament to a way of knowing that is deeply embodied, relying not on instruments, but on the refined perceptions of a human being in perfect harmony with their environment. And these echoes, these reflections, were just one more piece of the intricate wave-reading puzzle, just one of the many ways the ocean would speak. Next, we'll explore how these different swells, the main ones and their echoes, would interact with each other, creating even more complex patterns for the wayfinder to decipher. Having learned to recognize the ocean's long primary breaths, those persistent swells, and the gentle sigh of their reflections whispering back from unseen shores, you now delve deeper into the subtleties of the sea's language. The ocean is rarely a simple monologue of one swell and its echo. More often, it's a complex conversation, a place where multiple wave systems, like different voices, meet, mingle, and interact. It is within these zones of convergence, where swells softly merge and sometimes jostle, that the truly astute wayfinder could glean even more precise information about the location of land that lay just beyond the curve of the Earth. The basic principle at play here is something physicists call wave interference. When two or more waves meet in the same space, they don't just pass through each other unaffected. Their energies combine. If the crests of two waves arrive at the same point at the same time, they amplify each other, creating a momentarily higher wave. That's constructive interference. If the crest of one wave meets the trough of another, they can partially or wholly cancel each other out, leading to a momentarily flatter patch of water, destructive interference. Polynesian navigators were masters of observing the practical, tangible results of these interactions. This is a mainstream historical fact. They could identify specific areas at sea where different swells converged, creating characteristic, often named, patterns that indicated the direction and relative proximity of an island. So, as you continue your mental voyage, imagine you're in a region where the dominant ocean swell, perhaps rolling in steadily from the east, begins to encounter swells that have bent or refracted around the northern and southern sides of your target island. Or perhaps it's meeting a strong reflected swell coming directly from the island. Where these different wave trains meet and cross, the surface of the sea changes. You might find an area of what sailors sometimes call cross seas or pyramidal waves, where the water, instead of a regular, rhythmic lift and fall, takes on a more complex, sometimes choppier or more peaked appearance. The motion of the canoe under you would alter, becoming less predictable, perhaps a little more erratic, or exhibiting a distinctive, localized agitation. Imagine two very polite but incredibly insistent wave systems both trying to occupy the exact same patch of ocean at the very same moment. They don't exactly come to blows, you understand, but they do tend to create a rather animated and dynamic discussion, which your sensitive canoe then gets the job of translating for you, the navigator. It's like a lively session of oceanic group therapy, and your canoe is effectively lying on the therapist's couch, reporting all the subtle interactions. These interference patterns weren't just random choppiness. To the trained wayfinder, they had a discernible structure and often a clear alignment relative to the unseen island creating them. For instance, a particular pattern of converging swells might characteristically form a corridor or a series of agitated zones, leading towards the island, especially on its windward or upswell side. The navigator learns to identify these signature disturbances. They are seeking not just any confused sea, but a particular type of confusion, one that their training and the oral traditions of their people have taught them to associate with land lying in a specific direction. A rather intriguing and quirky tidbit from some traditions suggests that these convergence zones were sometimes thought of almost as gateways or pathways in the ocean. If you correctly identified the subtle signs of such a zone and skillfully maneuvered your canoe into it, it was believed that the patterns of the waves themselves could guide you more directly, or perhaps more safely, towards a specific landing spot or a clear passage through a treacherous reef system. It was less about finding the general direction of the island, which other signs would have already provided, and more about the fine-tuning of the final approach. Some also suggest that the very sound of the water, the way the waves lapped and slapped against the hulls of the canoe, could change subtly in these interference zones, a nuance that a keenly attuned ear, free from the noise pollution of our modern world, might well have been able to pick up. It's important to remember that these patterns are often incredibly subtle, especially when far from land. They are not usually the dramatic, steep waves you might see in a storm. The precise extent to which very subtle, short-crested interference patterns could be reliably used for navigation, especially in rougher seas or when multiple complex swell systems were already present, is naturally a topic of ongoing discussion and research among academics and modern practitioners of traditional navigation. Some researchers emphasize the more dominant, longer-period swell interactions as being the most consistently reliable indicators. Regardless, identifying these areas was a critical skill. It's the ocean's version of sending you a series of pop-up notifications. Landfall is approaching. Please prepare for slightly more complex wave choreography in your immediate vicinity. You certainly wouldn't want to be caught unawares and spill your precious fresh water or your meticulously prepared poi during one of these intricate oceanic dance numbers. The navigator, feeling these changes through the soles of their feet, through the balance of their body, and through the very structure of the canoe, would be constantly analyzing, is this the pattern I expect? Does it align with the direction my star course indicates for the island? This ability to read converging swells added yet another layer of rich detail to their incredibly sophisticated mental charts of the ocean. The sea was no longer a uniform, featureless expanse, but a place of subtle currents, echoes, and intricate wave dances, each movement holding potential meaning. If you thought parallel parking your car in a tight spot was a tricky maneuver, just try to imagine skillfully navigating a 60-foot double-hulled canoe through a dynamic zone of converging 15-second period ocean swells and their 7-second period reflections, probably in the dark of night, using primarily the feel of the water under you and your encyclopedic memory of wave behavior. It really does make that narrow spot outside the local supermarket seem like absolute child's play in comparison. Doesn't it? These complex interactions, the way primary swells met their own reflections or mingled with swells bent by unseen islands, created a rich, ever-changing tapestry of information on the surface of the ocean. The wayfinder, as a living, breathing sensor, learned to read this tapestry, transforming the subtle, liquid choreography into a reliable guide. And the primary tool for this delicate act of interpretation, beyond their own body, was the canoe itself. So, you've begun to understand how these complex interference patterns, these subtle dances where different ocean swells converge and whisper of nearby land, are read by the wayfinder. But how is this incredibly nuanced information actually perceived? The answer lies not just in the navigator's keenly developed senses, but in the very vessel that carries them across the sea, the voyaging canoe. This remarkable craft, often a majestic double-hulled canoe or ware kaulua, sometimes vaka moana depending on the specific culture, was far more than mere transportation. It was a highly sensitive, living instrument, an extension of the navigator's own body, designed to feel and transmit the ocean's most delicate messages. The genius of Polynesian naval architecture is a mainstream historical fact that continues to astound engineers today. These large voyaging canoes, typically ranging from 50 to 80 feet long, or even more, were constructed with two hulls connected by crossbeams. Crucially, these components of the hulls, the crossbeams, the mast, the decking were not rigidly fixed with nails or metal fastenings, which didn't exist in their toolkit for this purpose. Instead, they were meticulously lashed together with miles of strong cordage, usually made from coconut husk fiber, sinit. This method of construction resulted in a vessel that was incredibly strong yet possessed a unique structural flexibility. This flexibility is key. It allowed the canoe to subtly twist, flex, and respond to the varied pressures of the waves, rather than rigidly resisting them. Think of it not as your sturdy, unyielding family sedan, but more like a high-performance, finely tuned racing kayak or a thoroughbred horse, designed to feel and react to every subtle nuance of the terrain. Except the terrain here is a constantly shifting, three-dimensional liquid racetrack, and your vehicle talks back to you in gentle creaks, groans, and subtle shifts of balance. The navigator, therefore, wasn't just a passenger. They were an integral part of this sensory system. They would often position themselves in a specific part of the canoe known to be particularly sensitive for feeling the waves, perhaps lying down in one of the hulls, or sitting quietly on a central platform. Here, they could feel the canoe's pitch, the seesaw motion from bow to stern, its roll, the side-to-side rocking, and its yaw, the slight side-to-side swing of the bow. Each distinct swell system passing beneath the canoe would impart its own characteristic motion. A long, powerful swell from the port side might cause a slow, rhythmic lift and roll in that direction, while a shorter, choppier swell from ahead might create a quicker pitching motion. The navigator learned to discern these overlapping movements, to feel how the canoe responded differently to each wave train. As a particularly quirky and insightful tidbit, some accounts from oral traditions and modern practitioners suggest that navigators could also discern extremely subtle shifts in wave patterns by listening intently to the specific sounds the water made as it moved against different parts of the hulls. A certain kind of gurgle at the bow, a particular slap of water under the curve of the leeward hull, even the changing tune of the wind in the rigging or the subtle creaking of the sinnet lashings under varying stresses, each sound could be a tiny piece of the puzzle, a confirmation of what their body was feeling. It's like the canoe itself was humming or singing a song, and the navigator knew how to interpret the melody and the rhythm for vital clues about the ocean's state and the proximity of land. Some even believed certain parts of the canoe were more alive, or had a better mana or spiritual connection for sensing these telltale signs from the sea. The double-hulled design was particularly effective for this. Because the two hulls are some distance apart, they can straddle smaller waves or respond differently to waves approaching from an angle. The canoe might, for instance, pitch slightly as the main swell passes under one hull and then the other, while simultaneously exhibiting a rolling motion in response to a different swell coming from the beam. By paying close attention to these compound movements, the navigator could effectively dissect the complex wave environment and identify the direction and character of up to 3 or 4 different swell patterns simultaneously. The degree to which specific canoe design features, such as variations in hull shape, deep V versus more rounded, for instance, the height of the connecting platform, or the types of sails used across different Polynesian island groups, were consciously optimized for this refined wave-sensing capability versus other critical performance characteristics like speed, cargo capacity, or overall stability in heavy seas, is the subject of ongoing research and fascinating discussion among maritime historians, archaeologists, and those involved in building and sailing modern replicas. Early canoe research and development departments, if you can call them that, essentially generations of master builders and navigators refining designs through trial, error, and inspiration, must have had quite the design brief. Right then, team, for the next generation Vaca, we need it to be at least 5% faster, carry an additional dozen breadfruit saplings and 3 more pigs, be resilient enough to survive a Category 2 cyclone, and, most importantly, be able to clearly inform the navigator if there's a low-lying atoll roughly 70 miles to the northwest, purely by the way the port hull feels the subtle reflection of an easterly swell. No pressure at all. And yet, astonishingly, through their deep understanding of materials and hydrodynamics, they largely nailed it. The navigator and their canoe thus became a single, integrated system, a sort of organic cyborg of carefully shaped wood, intricately plated fiber, and supremely heightened human perception. The vessel wasn't just a passive platform. It was an active participant in the art of wayfinding. While the primary method of sensing swells was through the motion of the hulls, a navigator might also occasionally trail a hand or foot in the water, not so much for swell detection, but to feel for changes in water temperature or the direction of surface currents, especially when close to land or in known current rips. This deep, almost empathetic connection between the navigator and their vessel was profound. The canoe was their trusted companion, their shield against the immensity of the ocean, and their most sensitive instrument for divining its secrets. You certainly wouldn't ignore your car making a strange clunking or whining noise on a long road trip. You'd want to investigate. Well, the wayfinder treated every subtle sigh, every unexpected shudder, or every gentle shimmy from their canoe as a piece of potentially vital information. Is that the soothing sound of the ocean simply saying a gentle hello as it passes by, they might ponder? Or is the canoe subtly complaining about the distinct lack of onboard Wi-Fi again? Or perhaps, just perhaps, is it trying to tell me something far more important about a change in the sea state that hints at our destination? It was always worth investigating with the utmost attention. The canoe was the crucial interface, the translator, faithfully conveying the ocean's complex messages to the navigator's receptive mind, allowing them to build an ever more detailed picture of the unseen world around them, preparing them to look for signs that reached even further, like the flight of distant birds. Your finely crafted canoe, that sensitive extension of your own being, has carried you far, diligently translating the ocean's subtle swell language. It has helped you feel the faint echoes of distant shores and the complex interplay where different wave systems converge. But as you draw closer to your unseen destination, or even when still a considerable way off, the Pacific offers other, more animate clues. Your gaze now lifts from the water's surface, scanning the horizon and the air itself for feathered messengers, for specific seabirds whose behavior can confirm your course or guide your final approach to land. After potentially days or even weeks of seeing nothing but the endless expanse of water and sky, the sight of certain birds becomes a profoundly welcome and significant event. This isn't just any bird, of course. The wayfinder isn't craning their neck for a wandering albatross that might happily circle the globe without a care. They are looking for specific species, and this is a core mainstream historical fact of Polynesian navigation. They reliably use the predictable behavior of particular types of land-nesting seabirds to pinpoint the direction of unseen islands. Species like the graceful white tern, manuoku in Hawaiian, various types of nadas, and boobies are your key indicators. These birds have relatively limited foraging ranges from their island homes. They need to return to land to roost, nest, and feed their young. Typically, they might forage anywhere from 20 to 50 miles out, though some species, under certain conditions, might venture up to 100 miles or slightly more. Imagine the scene. The sun is beginning to dip towards the western horizon, painting the sky in those familiar, glorious hues. You've been sailing for days, guided by stars, sun, and swells. Then, a cry, and you spot them, a small flock of terns, flying steadily and with clear purpose, not randomly searching for fish, but heading in a determined line. If that line points towards the area where your other signs suggest land should be, it's a powerful confirmation. After days of nothing but the vast ocean and perhaps your crewmates' increasingly questionable repertoire of sea shanties, which, let's be honest, might be wearing a bit thin by week 3, spotting a tiny tern purposefully winging its way home must have been like seeing a beautifully illuminated, divinely crafted neon land ho sign designed by Mother Nature herself. And this one comes complete with elegant feathers and a much more melodious call. The specific behavior of these birds is crucial. In the morning, you'd look for them flying away from the direction of suspected land, heading out to their feeding grounds. In the evening, the pattern reverses. They fly towards land, often low and direct if they are carrying fish for their chicks. A bird seen diving and feeding might simply be at its hunting grounds, which could still be quite a distance from shore. But a bird flying resolutely in a straight line, especially at dawn or dusk, is a much stronger clue. The navigator would carefully observe this direction of flight, aligning it with their mental compass and the other signs they were constantly processing. There's a quirky tidbit found in some accounts concerning the use of marker birds. Certain traditions, particularly in parts of Micronesia but with echoes in Polynesia, speak of navigators sometimes carrying frigate birds on their canoes. Frigate birds are large, impressive seabirds, but they have very poorly waterproofed feathers and are extremely reluctant to land on water. The idea was that if a frigate bird was released far from land, it would circle the canoe, looking for a place to perch and eventually return. But if it sensed land within its range, it would supposedly fly off decisively in that direction. The navigator would then follow. The widespread practice and reliability of this as a primary landfinding technique is debated, as frigate birds can also soar for days on thermals, but it's a fascinating example of the intimate knowledge and innovative use of animal behavior. Some also say that the particular cry of a certain bird, if heard at an unexpected time or in an unusual location, could be interpreted as an omen or subtle sign, layered on top of its more direct navigational implication. Of course, you had to be an expert ornithologist by practice, if not by formal training. You needed to know your birds intimately, mistaking a truly pelagic species, one that spends most of its life far out at sea like some shearwaters or petrels, for a land-loving nada could lead to some fairly significant navigational oopsies. "Oh, that bird you're following with such hope?" your mentor might dryly remark. "Yes, he's just on his annual commute from the coast of Chile to Japan. Lovely plumage, but probably best not to follow him unless you've unexpectedly packed your thermal underwear and have a sudden craving for squid." The precise, reliable range at which specific bird species could indicate land, and how consistently their flight paths could be interpreted, especially during different seasons, like breeding versus non-breeding, or varying weather conditions, continues to be an area of careful study and sometimes lively discussion. Some anecdotal historical accounts from early European explorers, who learned from local navigators, suggest detection ranges that seem to push the upper limits of what current ornithological data might fully support for every single sighted species under all conditions, which just highlights the exceptional observational skills involved. Bird sightings were rarely used as a standalone clue until land was very close. Instead, they were woven into the larger tapestry of evidence. If the swells hinted at land in a certain direction, and the sun's position confirmed the latitude, then seeing a flock of homeward-bound terns flying towards that same quadrant would be a powerful corroboration. The emotional significance of these sightings cannot be overstated. Birds are symbols of life, and life, in the vastness of the ocean, meant land, fresh water, food, and safety. Their calls, heard before the birds themselves might even be clearly visible, could be the first hint that the long voyage was nearing its end. The evening commute for these land-based seabirds was truly a navigator's best friend. No frustrating traffic jams, no exorbitant toll roads to contend with, just a feathered arrow, or a whole squadron of them, pointing straight and true towards home sweet island. If only my own evening commute was that reliably scenic, filled with such clear purpose, and involved significantly more fresh sea air. As these feathered messengers guide your hopeful gaze, they join the chorus of clues, the subtle shifts in watercolor, the scent of vegetation on the wind, and the unique cloud formations that often crown volcanic islands, all heralding the journey's end. The sky above has offered its stellar and solar guidance. Your canoe has faithfully transmitted the ocean's rhythmic pulse, and the feathered messengers have pointed the way towards unseen shores. Now, as your journey continues and land is presumed to be drawing nearer, your attention is drawn once more to the waters around and beneath you, listening for the fainter, more subtle whispers from the ocean depths. The very life within the sea, and the flotsam it carries, can also provide valuable, if sometimes enigmatic, clues to the Polynesian wayfinder. As you sail closer to an island, the marine ecosystem around you begins to change. This is a foundational mainstream historical fact. Navigators keenly observed these shifts. Far out in the deep, pelagic zone, you encounter creatures adapted to the open ocean, perhaps large tuna, marlin, or oceanic sharks. But as you approach the shallower waters surrounding an island or an atoll, different species begin to appear. Schools of smaller, brightly colored reef fish, certain types of lagoon-dwelling fish, or coastal sharks that prefer shallower hunting grounds might be sighted. The presence of these homebody fish, species that don't typically venture too far from their reef or coastal habitats, is a strong indication that land, and the specific type of marine environment it supports, is not far off. It's like the ocean's way of subtly changing the welcome mat for you. Out in the vast deep, you get the big, mysterious, we've seen things you wouldn't believe type of fish. Closer to land, the piscine community changes, offering a more localized greeting. Hey, welcome to the neighborhood. The reef is just down the street, fantastic place for a bite, and the current gossip is particularly juicy today. Floating debris also tells a story. A random log sighted in the middle of the vast Pacific might simply be an ancient wanderer that has been adrift for months or even years. But if you start seeing fresher-looking branches, leaves, or, most tellingly, coconuts or pandanus fruits floating in the water, it's a very good sign. These items are unlikely to have survived an immensely long ocean journey without disintegrating or becoming heavily encrusted with marine growth. Their relative freshness suggests they haven't been in the water for too long and were likely washed out to sea from a nearby island, perhaps by a recent rainstorm or a river emptying into the ocean. The type of debris could also offer clues. A profusion of tree branches might suggest a high, volcanic island with lush vegetation, while palm fronds or coconuts might indicate a low-lying coral atoll. The behavior of dolphins and even whales could also be woven into the navigator's tapestry of evidence. Dolphins, being intelligent and curious creatures, are often known to approach and swim alongside canoes. Some traditions suggest that dolphins might, at times, seem to lead canoes towards land or through passages in reefs, though this is more anecdotal. Their feeding patterns, however, could be more reliably indicative. If you see a large pod of dolphins actively hunting and circling in a particular area, it might suggest the presence of an underwater seamount or the edge of an island submarine flank where upwellings bring nutrients to the surface, attracting smaller fish and, in turn, the dolphins. As for a quirky or fringe tidbit, some Pacific traditions speak of specific guardian marine animals, perhaps a particular type of shark or a revered turtle whose appearance at a certain point in a voyage or near a specific island would be considered highly significant, either as a good omen or a confirmation of location. Another fascinating area is the interpretation of bioluminescence, that ethereal glow from microscopic organisms in the water, often visible on dark nights. While generally widespread, an unusual concentration or specific pattern of phosphorescence could sometimes betray the presence of a submerged reef just below the surface, as the water is agitated over it, or it might indicate a dense school of fish, perhaps being driven towards or away from unseen land. Some varieties of seaweed, too, if seen floating in abundance and looking relatively fresh, would signal that its home reef or coastline wasn't too far away. Whales, with their majestic presence and long migrations, also feature in the lore of ocean navigation. While a single whale sighting is a magnificent event, their migratory paths, which sometimes loosely follow island chains or continental coastlines, were generally too broad and variable for pinpoint navigation. The reliability of using migratory patterns of large marine animals like whales for precise landfall, given their vast ranges and sometimes variable routes, is a point of discussion, with most scholars agreeing they offer general rather than pinpoint accuracy, unlike more stationary land indicators like specific bird behaviors or reflected swells. Following a whale hoping it will lead you to your specific tiny island destination is a bit like deciding to follow a random long-haul articulated lorry on the motorway, fervently hoping it's going directly to your grandma's very specific cul-de-sac. It might be going in the general direction for a good while, but its final destination is probably a lot further afield and likely involves significantly more industrial-sized snacks than your grandma typically provides. It's crucial to remember that these whispers from the deep were rarely taken in isolation. A navigator wouldn't typically alter course drastically based on a single fish sighting or a floating coconut. But when these signs aligned with the information gleaned from the stars, the sun, the swells, and the birds, they added weight to the evidence, increasing confidence that land was indeed near. Sometimes the clues were even more subtle, a slight change in the water's color, from the deep indigo of the open ocean to a lighter, perhaps greener or more turquoise hue closer to shore, indicating sediment runoff from land or the presence of a shallow lagoon. There might even be a different scent to the water or the air, a faint trace of damp earth, vegetation, or the organic richness of a coral reef carried on the breeze. The ocean, in these moments, begins to feel less like an empty void and more like a living, breathing entity, its inhabitants and its currents all contributing to the story of approach. You wouldn't necessarily rely on a single, faintly glowing jellyfish to confidently tell you where to make a sharp left turn for Tahiti. But if you encountered a whole mesmerizing disco party of them, accompanied by some very excited dolphins doing aerial acrobatics, and a freshly broken breadfruit branch gently floating by, now you're definitely talking. The ocean's subtle clues often came as part of an accumulating package deal, a convergence of signs that the destination was close. As these hints from the marine world corroborate the messages from above and the feel of the water beneath, the wayfinder also scans the horizon for one of the most visually compelling signs of land: the clouds that gather above it. The whispers from the ocean depths, the subtle clues from its inhabitants, and the treasures it carries have all added to your growing conviction that land is near. Your senses are heightened, every faculty alert. Now, as your gaze sweeps the horizon, often in the soft light of dawn or dusk when visual cues can be most revealing, you search for another powerful, and often earlier, sign: the stationary cloudy crown that so often graces an unseen island. Long before the dark line of land itself is visible, its presence can be betrayed by the clouds that gather above it, a telltale atmospheric signature. Islands, particularly the higher volcanic ones common throughout much of Polynesia, have a significant impact on the air masses flowing around and over them. This is the well-understood meteorological science behind the sign, and a mainstream historical fact of navigation. Polynesian wayfinders were exceptionally skilled at identifying specific types of stationary or semi-stationary cloud formations that tend to accumulate over or stream downwind from islands. As moist ocean air is forced upwards by the slopes of a high island, a process called orographic lift, it cools, and the water vapor within it condenses to form clouds. Even low-lying atolls can create enough of a thermal difference with the surrounding ocean to influence cloud formation above them, perhaps creating a more persistent small cumulus cloud or a clearer patch in an otherwise overcast sky. So, what are you looking for as you scan that vast arc where sea meets sky? You're not just looking for any cloud. The ocean is full of drifting clouds, ephemeral puffs of white carried along by the prevailing winds. Instead, you are searching for a cloud or a cluster of clouds that seems to hold its position, a fixed point in an otherwise moving skyscape. While other clouds parade by, this particular formation lingers, anchored to an invisible point on the horizon. It might be a cap of cloud sitting directly over the island, or a plume streaming away from it on the leeward side. Its shape might be different too, perhaps more substantial, or possessing a certain telltale density that speaks of a landmass interacting with the atmosphere. Out on the open ocean, most clouds are just casual visitors, drifting through like tourists with a very busy sightseeing itinerary. But an island cloud? Ah, that's a permanent resident, a dedicated local who's clearly put down roots, maybe even built a charming little cloudy bungalow right above its favorite piece of solid ground. The color of these land-indicating clouds can also be incredibly informative. This is a classic quirky, yet highly practical, tidbit passed down through generations of wayfinders. The underside of a cloud hanging over a shallow lagoon or a coral atoll can sometimes take on a distinct greenish or pale turquoise tint. This is the faint reflection of the sunlit, vibrant colors of the shallow water and coral After this correction. The thought process is to weave in the scholarly debate, add 2 more jokes, and then conclude the section while ensuring it stays within the word count and narrative style. Scholarly debate part. The maximum distance at which these telltale cloud formations can be reliably distinguished from common oceanic clouds and accurately interpreted as land indicators, especially for low-lying atolls versus high islands, is subject to ongoing discussion, as atmospheric conditions such as wind speed, humidity, and overall weather patterns can greatly influence their visibility, persistence, and characteristic form. It's one thing to spot a massive cloud bank over a large volcanic island on a clear day, quite another to discern the subtle atmospheric haze or tiny, persistent puff above a small, flat atoll in more ambiguous conditions. Joke 2. It's like nature's own rather understated, but usually reliable, weather forecast. Partly cloudy today with a 100% chance of actual, tangible land if you diligently sail towards that one incredibly stubborn cloud that steadfastly refuses to join its fluffy mates on their breezy pub crawl across the endless sky. General life advice. Really, always trust the stubborn cloud when it comes to finding islands. Joke 3. You have to be careful, though, and not get too emotionally invested in the first vaguely stationary-looking bit of fluff you see. Get too fixated on a particularly majestic cumulus that's just, having a very lazy, contemplative sort of day, and you might end up navigating enthusiastically towards a very surprised and rather bewildered seagull wondering why an entire canoe is suddenly following it with such hopeful expressions. Always cross-reference your fluffy celestial omens with other, more grounded, signs. Conclusion. Reinforce clouds as beacons, often the first visual confirmation, and then link to even more subtle clues of water and sky color that will be discussed next. Okay, resuming the section from vibrant colors of the shallow water and coral, the color of these land-indicating clouds can also be incredibly informative. This is a classic quirky, yet highly practical, tidbit passed down through generations of wayfinders. The underside of a cloud hanging over a shallow lagoon or a coral atoll can sometimes take on a distinct greenish or pale turquoise tint. This is the faint reflection of the sunlit, vibrant colors of the shallow water and coral, a beautiful and reliable sign. Similarly, a cloud hanging over a densely vegetated island might appear slightly darker on its underside due to the reduced reflection from the dark green forest canopy compared to the bright sea. These subtle hues, almost imperceptible to an untrained eye, would leap out at the experienced navigator. This ability to distinguish the land cloud from transient weather clouds is paramount. While general weather systems move with the prevailing winds, an island-generated cloud will appear to remain more or less stationary relative to the Earth, even if the wind is blowing through it and its shape is constantly, subtly reforming. The navigator would observe it over hours, noting its persistence against the backdrop of drifting oceanic clouds. The maximum distance at which these telltale cloud formations can be reliably distinguished from common oceanic clouds and accurately interpreted as land indicators, especially for low-lying atolls versus high islands, is subject to ongoing discussion, as atmospheric conditions such as wind speed, humidity, and overall weather patterns can greatly influence their visibility, persistence, and characteristic form. It's one thing to spot a massive cloud bank over a large volcanic island on a clear day, quite another to discern the subtle atmospheric haze or tiny, persistent puff above a small, flat atoll in more ambiguous conditions. It's like nature's own rather understated, but usually reliable, weather forecast. Partly cloudy today with a 100% chance of actual, tangible land if you diligently sail towards that one incredibly stubborn cloud that steadfastly refuses to join its fluffy mates on their breezy pub crawl across the endless sky. General life advice. Really, always trust the stubborn cloud when it comes to finding islands, especially when it's corroborated by other evidence. Dawn and dusk are often the best times for these observations. The low angle of the sun can highlight the structure and color of clouds more effectively, and the subtle differences between a land cloud and the surrounding sky may become more apparent. And, of course, this sign, like all the others, is rarely used in isolation. If birds are seen flying towards that persistently stationary cloud in the evening, or if a reflected swell pattern seems to originate from beneath it, the evidence for land in that direction becomes overwhelmingly strong. Imagine the quiet sense of satisfaction, the gentle surge of anticipation, when such a cloud is confidently identified after a long passage. It's a visual promise, a beacon hanging in the sky. You have to be careful, though, and not get too emotionally invested in the first vaguely stationary-looking bit of fluff you see. Get too fixated on a particularly majestic cumulus that's just, having a very lazy, contemplative sort of day, and you might end up navigating enthusiastically towards a very surprised and rather bewildered seagull wondering why an entire canoe is suddenly following it with such hopeful expressions. Always cross-reference your fluffy celestial omens with other, more grounded, signs. These cloudy crowns, then, often serve as one of the first truly visual confirmations that your long journey is nearing its destination. They are celestial signposts, painted on the vast canvas of the sky by the breath of the land itself. And as you sail towards them, your eyes also begin to scan for even more subtle shifts in the appearance of the sky and the water itself, clues that speak of the final miles to landfall. The cloudy crown of your destination hangs invitingly on the horizon, a steadfast beacon where before there was only an empty expanse. As you sail ever closer, drawn by this celestial signpost and the chorus of other clues, your senses become attuned to even finer, more delicate messages from the environment. The very hues of the distant sea and sky begin to shift, subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, as the influence of the unseen landmass ahead starts to paint the world around you with a new palette. Far out in the deep ocean, the water possesses a profound, almost luminous, indigo blue, the color of immense depth and vastness. But as you approach an island, particularly one with surrounding reefs or lagoons, this is a mainstream historical fact that Polynesian navigators were keenly aware of. The seawater itself begins to change color. That deep oceanic indigo might gradually give way to lighter shades of blue, then perhaps to a vibrant turquoise or even a distinct green as you move over shallower waters where sunlight can reflect off a sandy bottom or through water rich with microscopic life stirred up from the reef. If the island is volcanic and has rivers, the water might even take on a slightly brownish or milky tint near the coast after heavy rains. As sediment is washed out to sea, you watch for these transitions, your eyes scanning the water ahead, noting the subtle graduation of color that speaks of decreasing depth and the approaching embrace of land. The deep ocean has that very specific, almost unnerving, eau de abyss color palette, doesn't it? A profound, soul-stirring blue. But as you get closer to land, you notice the water starts to rummage through its holiday wardrobe. Ah, a bit of jaunty turquoise over there. A sophisticated splash of lagoon green just ahead. It's basically putting on its finest resort wear to properly welcome you. The sky, too, can whisper of land's proximity through subtle shifts in its appearance. The clear, sharp horizon of the open ocean might begin to soften, perhaps with a slight haze gathering in the direction of the island, caused by dust, pollen, or increased humidity rising from the landmass. The colors of sunrise and sunset can also be affected. The brilliant, fiery reds and oranges of an oceanic sunset might be subtly muted or take on different tones if there's a large landmass nearby influencing the atmospheric particles that scatter the sunlight. You might observe a persistent, localized bank of haze that the sun has to punch through in the morning, or a particular way the light diffuses around that stationary cloud we spoke of earlier. Then there's the loom of land, a phenomenon sailors have noted for centuries. This is the subtle visual presence of land on the horizon before it is clearly defined or identifiable. It might appear as a slight darkening of the sky just above the sea, or conversely, sometimes a faint lightening, depending on the nature of the land, its vegetation, and the lighting conditions. It's not the island itself you see, but its faint imprint on the atmosphere, a shadowy promise. This requires an incredibly trained eye, one accustomed to the open ocean's typical horizon and able to detect the most minute deviations. A particularly delightful quirky tidbit related to these visual cues is the blink or glare of sunlight reflecting off a distant, calm lagoon. This bright, shimmering patch, sometimes seen directly on the horizon or, more often, reflected onto the underside of those convenient island-indicating clouds, could act like a natural beacon. Some Polynesian languages have words that describe this specific phenomenon, this watery gleam that signals safety and landfall. It's as if the lagoon itself is winking at you from afar. Some navigators also spoke of the light itself feeling different, or having a different quality, when close to land, perhaps a subtle change in its clarity or diffusion caused by the invisible breath of the island. Of course, interpreting these subtle color shifts and atmospheric effects is an art form. The navigator must distinguish them from changes caused by weather patterns, such as an approaching rain squall or a bank of distant fog, which might create similar visual effects but would behave differently, moving with the wind rather than remaining fixed. The consistency and effective range at which subtle atmospheric haze or the loom of land can be detected and reliably interpreted, particularly under varying light and weather conditions, like a hazy day versus a crystal clear one, remain subjects of ongoing discussion and study, relying heavily on anecdotal accounts from seasoned mariners and the highly developed, subjective observational skills of traditional practitioners. Trying to spot the loom of land for the first time can be a bit like attempting to see one of those magic eye pictures from the 1990s. You have to sort of unfocus your gaze, tilt your head just so, maybe hum a little tune, and then suddenly, bam! There's a vague, blurry suggestion of something that might just possibly be an island. Or, you might just be really, really tired and seeing things. Experience, as always, definitely helps refine the focus. The interplay of light and water is critical here. The angle of the sun, the clarity of the atmosphere, the calmness of the sea, all these factors influence the visibility and intensity of these subtle hues. Reflections play a huge part, not just from lagoons onto clouds, but even the general sheen of the water can change as currents are altered by an island's presence, affecting how light bounces off the surface. And often, accompanying these visual cues, as we've touched upon, is the very scent of the land, the fragrance of damp earth, blooming flowers, or wood smoke, carried out to sea on the breeze, a delightful olfactory confirmation that your eyes are not deceiving you. These are often among the final, most delicate confirmations before the land itself, perhaps as a low dark line or the peak of a mountain, finally resolves into clear view. If the majestic clouds are indeed the island's welcoming hat, and the busy seabirds are its dedicated messenger service, then these subtle, beautiful color shifts in the surrounding water and sky are surely like the island gently blushing, just a little, because it knows you're about to arrive. "Oh, stop it, you!" the island seems to whisper, turning a particularly fetching shade of coastal turquoise in anticipation. As these fine-tuned observations of color and light build upon all the other signs, the navigator also remains constantly aware of another critical element, one that has been their companion and their motive force throughout the entire journey: the wind. The subtle blushes of color in the water and sky, the stationary crown of clouds, these visual whispers have guided your eyes and confirmed your path. Yet, throughout this entire journey, from the moment you first imagined setting sail, one elemental force has been your constant companion, your engine, and often, another subtle informant: the wind. Riding these predictable, gentle breezes, or sometimes contending with their more fickle moods, was the very essence of Polynesian voyaging, and understanding their patterns was as crucial as reading the stars or the swells. The great voyaging canoes, with their ingeniously designed sails woven from pandanus leaves or similar plant fibers, were, of course, entirely reliant on the wind for propulsion across vast distances. This is a fundamental mainstream historical fact. Polynesian voyages were not haphazard affairs left to the whims of chance breezes, but were strategically planned and meticulously executed to take maximum advantage of predictable seasonal wind patterns. Chief among these were the remarkably consistent trade winds, the northeast trades in the northern hemisphere Pacific and the southeast trades in the southern hemisphere Pacific. These winds, born from global atmospheric circulation patterns, blow with a steadiness that made them the invisible highways of the ancient ocean. The trade winds were like the ocean's surprisingly reliable and entirely free public transport system. If you knew the routes and the timetables, the seasons when they were strongest and most dependable, you could get a surprisingly long way across the Pacific without ever having to pay a complicated fare. Though, one must admit, the in-flight entertainment, which usually consisted of just more waves and the occasional flying fish, could get a tad repetitive after a few weeks. Knowledge of these prevailing winds profoundly influenced voyage planning. Often, exploratory voyages seeking new islands were deliberately undertaken by sailing upwind or at an angle into the prevailing wind. This was a clever strategy. It was undoubtedly harder work making progress against the wind, tacking back and forth, but it ensured that if no land was found, or if supplies ran low, the return journey home would be a relatively straightforward and much faster sail with the wind comfortably behind them. Knowing when these winds shifted, or when seasonal counterwinds might offer a temporary window for travel in an otherwise difficult direction, was all part of the Wayfinder's extensive environmental almanac. As you draw closer to an island, the wind itself can begin to exhibit more localized behaviors, offering further clues. Land masses, especially larger ones, can disrupt the flow of the prevailing wind and create their own microclimates. You might begin to feel the subtle influence of land and sea breezes. During the day, the land heats up faster than the sea, causing air to rise over the island and drawing in a cooler breeze from the ocean, a sea breeze. At night, the opposite can occur. The land cools down more quickly than the sea, causing denser, cooler air to flow from the land out over the water, a land breeze. A navigator approaching an island at night might suddenly feel this gentle, often fragrant, land breeze carrying the scent of earth and vegetation, a sure sign that their destination is close. Mountainous islands can also produce katabatic winds, where cool air from higher elevations flows down the slopes towards the sea, particularly at night, creating distinct offshore breezes in certain areas. A particularly interesting and quirky tidbit is the notion that highly skilled navigators might have been able to detect extremely subtle changes in the wind's temperature or humidity even before a distinct land or sea breeze became apparent. A slight increase in humidity or a fractional change in air temperature could indicate that the wind had recently passed over a landmass or a significantly different body of water, like a large, warm lagoon. Some also suggest that the very sound of the wind as it flowed through the rigging of the canoe or against the taut surface of the sail could be read by an experienced ear, with subtle shifts in its pitch or timbre indicating minute changes in wind direction or strength, long before they were obvious enough to be felt directly on the skin. These local wind effects could be incredibly useful in the final stages of a voyage. If you found yourself becalmed as the sun set, the appearance of a gentle offshore land breeze a few hours later could give you the final push towards the shore, or at least confirm the island's presence and direction. The extent to which ancient Polynesian navigators understood and could accurately predict less regular, large-scale meteorological phenomena, such as El Niño Southern Oscillation NSO events, which we now know significantly alter Pacific wind and current patterns for extended periods, and whether they consciously adapted their long-distance voyaging strategies accordingly, is a subject of very active research and ongoing debate among climate scientists, archaeologists, and ethno-historians. Of course, the wind wasn't always a perfectly behaved and obliging servant. Sometimes it would metaphorically throw a bit of a tantrum, refuse to blow at all for days on end, leaving the canoe drifting idly, or decide to blow with great fury from precisely the wrong direction. That's when the navigator truly earned their keep, their calm demeanor and deep knowledge essential for maintaining morale and using every other available skill, reading the currents, conserving resources, watching the swells, while the wind was, shall we say, metaphorically sulking in its room and refusing to cooperate with the travel plans. The wind, as we've touched upon before, is also a crucial carrier of other signs. It brings you the scent of damp earth, fragrant flowers, or even wood smoke from an island's hearths. It can also carry the distant sounds of land, perhaps the faint roar of surf breaking on a reef, or the cries of a large seabird colony, long before these things are visible. The feel of the wind on your skin, its kiss or its buffet, the sight of it filling the sail, the sound of it humming in the rigging, these are constant, intimate sensory inputs for everyone aboard the canoe. Changes in wind direction or strength would also, naturally, affect the patterns of local wind-generated waves and could even subtly influence the direction or feel of the larger ocean swells, requiring the navigator to constantly recalibrate their interpretations. A good navigator, you imagine, must have had a very personal, almost conversational relationship with the wind. They probably had their own descriptive, perhaps even affectionate names for different types of breezes. Ah, listen, that's Barry, the boisterous northeasterly, always a bit too keen to show off his strength, isn't he? And here comes Susan, the soft, gentle southerly, much more relaxing for a quiet afternoon sail. It does make you wonder what colorful epithets they might have reserved for a frustratingly flat calm, when progress was painstakingly slow. The wind, then, was this dynamic, ever-present partner in the voyage, the breath of the ocean, the power in their sails, a bringer of vital clues, and a constant reminder of the interconnectedness of sea, sky, and land. Keeping track of its effects on the canoe's progress, hour by hour, day by day, was essential for knowing where you were, which leads us to the mental arithmetic of the journey. The wind, your steadfast, if occasionally temperamental, ally, has propelled your canoe across the vastness, carrying whispers of land and shaping your journey. But simply being moved by the wind isn't enough. The wayfinder must also meticulously track that movement, maintaining a constant, intuitive plot of the canoe's presumed position. This is the art of dead reckoning, a continuous mental calculation of where you are, based on where you've been, how fast you think you're going, in what direction, and for how long. It's the invisible thread that connects all other observations, the internal GPS running silently in the navigator's mind. Forget about satellite pings or detailed nautical charts spread on a table. The Polynesian navigator's chart was largely held within their memory, and their plotting was a dynamic, ongoing process. This is a crucial mainstream historical fact. They practiced a highly sophisticated form of mental dead reckoning. At its core, this involved constantly updating their estimated position by gauging the canoe's speed, the time elapsed since the last reliable fix, perhaps from a star observation, the course steered by the stars or sun, and, crucially, making allowances for the sideways drift caused by the wind, leeway, and the push of known ocean currents. It's a demanding cognitive task, requiring unwavering attention and a deep understanding of the vessel's performance in different conditions. So, how did they estimate something as fundamental as speed without a speedometer? Several ingenious methods were used. A common technique was to observe the flow of water or bubbles along the hull of the canoe. The navigator might note how quickly a piece of foam, a particular bubble, or even a bit of deliberately thrown-in light material traveled a known length of the canoe. They might also judge speed by the feel of the wind on their skin, the pressure of the water against a trailing hand or a paddle, the angle and size of the wake streaming out behind the canoe, or even the sound the water made as the hulls sliced through it. It's like a very low-tech, organic speedometer system. "All right, crew," the navigator might mentally note. "We seem to be maintaining a steady, let's call it 3 particularly excited bubbles per second past the aft beam. Let's try to pick that up to a solid 4-bubble cruise if this breeze holds. Shall we?" Surprisingly effective, it seems, when calibrated by years of experience. Tracking the passage of time was equally vital. Without clocks, the wayfinder relied on the steady movements of the celestial bodies. The changing position of the sun during the day, or the progress of specific stars and constellations across the night sky, provided a natural timepiece. They knew how far a certain star group should travel in a given period, allowing them to estimate elapsed hours. Some researchers suggest that an internalized sense of rhythm, perhaps even aided by specific chants or rhythmic counting sequences as a quirky tidbit, might have helped in marking shorter intervals or in maintaining a consistent count for speed estimations. With estimates for speed and time, and knowing the direction steered, the navigator could then mentally plot the canoe's progress across their internal map of the ocean. They would visualize the canoe moving from its last known point, hour by hour, updating its position, always holding in their mind the intended destination and the track they were making towards it. This wasn't a casual daydream. It was a rigorous mental discipline. One of the greatest challenges in dead reckoning, especially over long oceanic voyages, is accounting for the effects of currents. An unseen current can carry a canoe significantly off course, even if a perfect heading is maintained. Polynesian navigators had an extensive knowledge of major ocean currents, their typical locations, strengths, and seasonal variations, passed down through oral traditions. They would factor these known currents into their mental calculations. The exact methods and accuracy with which ancient navigators could compensate for complex and often unseeable ocean currents over very long distances, especially those currents running counter or perhaps diagonally to their intended course, remain an area of intense study and some healthy debate. It likely involved a combination of remembered patterns, acute observation of subtle cues like changes in swell patterns when entering a current, water temperature shifts, or even the behavior of marine life. Imagine your phone battery has just died, Google Maps has vanished into the ether, and you have to figure out precisely where you are based on how fast you think you've been walking in roughly what direction, for approximately how long, all while also being gently but persistently pushed sideways by a rogue shopping trolley that seems to have a mind of its own and a distinctly wonky wheel. That, in a nutshell, is the essence of dead reckoning, but with considerably higher stakes, a lot more salt water involved, and no chance of bumping into a helpful local to ask for directions. The concentration and memory required for this continuous mental calculus are truly immense. There was no undo button. No way to easily erase a miscalculation made hours or even days earlier. Each observation, each estimation built upon the last. This system of dead reckoning was the vital framework that integrated all the other navigational techniques. The stars might provide a periodic fix, a confirmation of latitude or a precise bearing. The swells, the birds, the clouds would offer clues to the direction and proximity of land. But it was dead reckoning that filled the long gaps in between, that kept the voyage on track through cloudy nights or days of open ocean when no other specific land signs were present. You might recall the Micronesian attack system we touched upon earlier, that sophisticated method of visualizing a reference island moving under the canoe. That too is a form of dynamic position keeping, a way to mentally track progress across the void. The navigator's brain wasn't just a passive map. It was a constantly running, real-time simulation, a biological supercomputer fueled by generations of experience and continuously updated by fresh seawater-scented data. It was always asking that implicit question, "Are we there yet?" And then calmly, methodically calculating the answer for itself, and probably, with a serene smile, telling any anxious young crew members in the back of the metaphorical canoe, "No, not just yet, my eager young friends, but I estimate approximately another 73 sunrises should see us there, give or take a friendly pod of dolphins or a particularly stubborn headwind." This constant, intuitive course plotting was the invisible architecture holding the entire remarkable voyage together, a testament to the navigator's profound intellectual skill and unwavering focus, skills that were nurtured and passed down within a very special social and cultural context. That constant, intricate mental calculus of dead reckoning, the silent hum of the navigator's mind plotting a course across the unseen ocean, was not a skill acquired lightly or by chance. The individuals who held this profound knowledge, the wayfinders, were far more than just skilled sailors. They were lore keepers, sea path sharers, and figures of immense importance and deep respect within their communities. Their ability to bridge the vast oceanic distances was the lifeblood of Polynesian societies, connecting islands for trade, kinship, and the sharing of resources and ideas. This is a central mainstream historical fact. Navigational expertise in these cultures was a highly specialized and deeply revered body of knowledge. It was often transmitted through incredibly rigorous, long-term apprenticeships, where carefully chosen individuals, frequently from specific families or chiefly lineages who had a traditional claim to this wisdom, would learn directly from established master navigators. This wasn't a casual hobby. It was a sacred trust, a vital inheritance essential for the community's survival, its expansion, and the maintenance of its ancestral connections across the watery expanse. Holding this knowledge bestowed considerable prestige, but it also came with an equally profound weight of responsibility. The fate of entire communities, their safety and prosperity, often rested squarely on the shoulders and within the mind of their wayfinder. The training to become such a figure typically began in early childhood. A young apprentice, perhaps a son, nephew, or other promising protege, would be taken under the wing of a master. Their education wasn't confined to a classroom. The ocean itself was their primary teacher, the canoe their schoolhouse. They would spend countless hours, days, years, simply observing, watching the stars while overhead, feeling the subtle dance of the canoe under them, noting the flight of birds, the colors of the water, the smell of the wind. They would commit to memory vast amounts of information. The star compass, the seasonal behavior of winds and swells, the genealogies and epic poems that, as we've touched upon, often encoded precise navigational instructions and island lore within their verses. This wasn't a weekend workshop on celestial navigation for dummies and a potluck lunch. Oh no, this was a profound, lifetime commitment. The final examination, if one can even call it that, probably involved something along the lines of successfully navigating to a rarely visited mythical island using only a particularly insightful coconut and a very determined, well-trained seagull, all while flawlessly reciting a 20,000-line epic poem backwards. Past that, and you might just get your provisional learner's permit for the boundless open Pacific. This intricate knowledge, this lore of the sea paths, was preserved and passed down primarily through oral tradition. Chance would not only help memorize star patterns but also recount the voyages of ancestors, describing the routes taken, the islands discovered, and the specific signs that marked the way. The social structures that supported this transmission often resembled what we might loosely term guilds or schools of navigation. These weren't necessarily formalized institutions with ivy-covered walls and a dean, but rather close-knit groups of practitioners, often bound by kinship, who were dedicated to safeguarding, refining, and imparting this precious knowledge. A fascinating and somewhat quirky tidbit that surfaces in some discussions of traditional training methods is the idea that apprentices might have undergone periods of deliberate sensory focus, or even temporary deprivation to heighten their other faculties. Imagine, for instance, being tasked with discerning wave patterns while blindfolded, forcing you to rely entirely on the feel of the canoe's motion through your body, sharpening that kinesthetic sense to an almost unbelievable degree. Beyond mere technical skill, it was also paramount that a navigator demonstrate the appropriate spiritual character humility, respect for the ocean, for the gods, for the ancestors, and a deep sense of responsibility. Only then might they be considered fully initiated into the deepest secrets of the craft. Much of this advanced knowledge was not for general consumption. It was often considered sacred, taboo, or restricted, shared only with those few initiates who had proven their dedication, their aptitude, and their trustworthiness over many years. The degree to which these navigational schools or guilds were formally structured institutions across all of the vast Polynesian triangle versus more localized, family-based, or even individual master-apprentice modes of knowledge transmission, and the precise extent to which specialized knowledge was deliberately kept secret or was perhaps more openly shared within the trusted confines of a specific community, likely varied considerably between different island groups and across different time periods. It's a complex picture, pieced together from oral histories, early ethnographic accounts, and archaeological evidence. You certainly couldn't just fire up your ancient Polynesian internet search engine and Google how to find Hawaii from Tahiti, avoiding a particularly grumpy patch of ocean just south of the equator. The search results, I imagine, would be conspicuously blank. This knowledge was often more exclusive than a coveted VIP pass to the universe's most elite celestial afterparty. And the bouncer at the door of that particular knowledge club was probably a very serious-looking elder, perhaps with an intricate star map symbolically tattooed across his back, assessing your worthiness with a gaze as deep and knowing as the ocean itself. The wayfinder, therefore, was not merely a human GPS. They were a historian, a cosmologist, a poet, a leader, and a vital spiritual link to the ancestral past. Their role encompassed far more than just getting a canoe from point A to point B. They were responsible for maintaining the connections between scattered island communities, for pioneering new settlements, for ensuring the survival of their people by guiding them to resources, and for upholding the traditions and the worldview that gave their voyages meaning. Imagine the sheer weight of that career advice from the village elder. So, my young friend, you aspire to be a wayfinder? Excellent choice. The benefits are many: profound respect, thrilling adventure, an almost endless supply of fresh seafood. The only real downside is, well, if you happen to mess up rather badly, pretty much everyone gets very, very lost and then exceedingly hungry. And there isn't exactly a customer complaints department you can appeal to, just a host of very disappointed ancestors looking down. So, high pressure but undeniably high reward if you get it right. This deep, carefully guarded well of human knowledge, this intricate system of observation, memory, and skill, meticulously preserved and passed down through generations, was the invisible framework that made these epic voyages possible. And it was all put into practice aboard the remarkable vessels that were, in themselves, masterpieces of engineering and artistry. This profound navigational wisdom, this sacred ancestral lore meticulously preserved and passed down by the wayfinders, needed a worthy vessel, a craft capable of traversing thousands of miles of open ocean, carrying not just people, but the very seeds of new communities. And the Polynesians, with an ingenuity that still inspires awe, created just that. The magnificent voyaging canoe, a true masterpiece of Stone Age technology and a testament to their deep understanding of the sea. When you picture these ancient voyages, you should envision not a simple dugout, but most often a formidable double-hulled canoe, known as a wai kaulua in Hawaii, a wakamoana or taiparua in other parts of Polynesia, with regional variations in name and specific design. This is the central mainstream historical fact regarding their sea craft. These large voyaging canoes, typically ranging from 50 to perhaps over 100 feet in length, were constructed from carefully selected local woods. Their planks were often painstakingly shaped and fitted, then sewn or, more accurately, lashed together with immense quantities of sennit, incredibly strong rope meticulously twisted and braided from coconut husk fibers. They featured a distinctive and highly efficient triangular or crab claw sail, woven from the durable leaves of the pandanus tree. This overall design provided a remarkable combination of stability, thanks to the twin hulls, surprising speed, and the crucial carrying capacity needed for long, arduous migratory voyages. The creation of such a vessel was an immense undertaking, a communal effort steeped in tradition and practical skill. It would begin with the selection of suitable trees, often large, mature hardwoods like koa, tamanu, or breadfruit. This selection process itself might have been guided by rituals, as hinted by certain quirky tidbits from oral traditions. A master canoe builder, a kahuna kale wa in Hawaiian, might listen to the wood, seeking trees that possessed the right character or spiritual essence, or perhaps be guided by dreams or omens to the perfect specimen. The felling of such a tree was a significant event, often accompanied by chants and offerings to the forest gods to ensure their blessing and cooperation. Building one of these truly magnificent ocean-going vessels wasn't a casual weekend IKEA flat-pack project. You can be sure. Darling, have you by any chance seen the assembly instructions for the Moana's Marvel 70-foot double hull? I seem to be missing a few thousand fathoms of sennit lashings and perhaps a crucial spiritual blessing from Tain, god of forests. This was high craftsmanship, communal dedication, and sacred duty, all elegantly rolled into one. Once felled, the massive logs would be roughly shaped using adzes, painstakingly crafted from hard stone like basalt, or sometimes from large, durable shells. If a single log of sufficient size wasn't available for a hull, skilled builders would shape and fit individual planks, their edges carefully beveled, and then lash them together with that ubiquitous sennit, often through precisely drilled holes, caulking the seams with natural resins or plant fibers to make them watertight. The real genius, as we've touched upon when discussing the canoe as a sensory instrument, lay in these lashings. Instead of rigid metal fastenings, the thousands of individual sennit ties holding the hulls, crossbeams, iako, and platform together allowed the entire structure to flex and absorb the tremendous stresses imposed by ocean waves, preventing it from shattering under impact. This engineered resilience was paramount. It's also widely believed that specific rituals and potent chants were integral to each stage of the canoe's construction, from the shaping of the hulls to the raising of the mast and the final launching. These weren't just superstitious additions. They were seen as essential for imbuing the vessel with mana, spiritual power, efficacy, and good fortune to ensure its safety, its sea kindliness, and the success of its voyages. The characteristic crab claw sail, with its distinctive V-shape, often with the point downwards, was another marvel of Polynesian ingenuity. Made from many individual sections of pandanus matting sewn together, this sail was remarkably efficient, particularly for sailing across the wind or even slightly into it, allowing for greater maneuverability and the ability to make progress in a wider range of wind conditions than a simple square sail might. The exact evolution of the double-hulled canoe design across the vast expanse of Polynesia, and the precise degree of influence or independent invention versus shared ancestral designs for specific key features like this iconic crab claw sail, remain fascinating areas of active discussion and ongoing research among maritime archaeologists, anthropologists, and cultural historians. Imagine the rigorous sea trials these vessels would have undergone. Right then, team, the master builder might declare, "First, does it actually float with all of us aboard? Good. That's a promising start. Does it generally proceed in the direction we enthusiastically point it with the steering paddle? Excellent. And, most crucially, does it make those reassuringly subtle creaking and groaning noises of a well-lashed, flexible vessel, instead of any truly terrifying, sharp, splintering ones when a particularly large wave decides to give us an overly enthusiastic watery hug? Perfect. She's clearly ready for a casual jaunt of a few thousand miles across the open ocean then." The quality control, in its own deeply experienced and intuitive way, was undoubtedly intense. These canoes were not merely transport. They were floating ecosystems, capable of carrying dozens of people, along with essential provisions for weeks or months at sea, preserved foods, gourds filled with fresh water, and, crucially for colonization voyages, a veritable ark of carefully chosen plants, like taro corms, breadfruit saplings, sweet potato and sugar cane, and domestic animals, pigs, chickens, and dogs. They were, in essence, mobile life support systems, carrying the potential for new civilizations within their twin hulls. The canoe was more than wood and fiber. It was a potent symbol of cultural identity, a tangible link to the ancestors who had first ventured into the unknown, and a testament to the enduring human spirit of exploration. The immense community effort required to build and provision such a vessel would have further solidified social bonds and collective purpose. These really weren't just simple boats. They were a profound statement to the world. "We are the people of this great ocean," they declared, "and we craft these incredible vessels that are not only highly functional, but also possess a stark, elemental beauty and an almost unbelievable resilience. They can carry our entire world with us, including that one particularly annoying rooster that insists on crowing at 3 o'clock in the morning, no matter where we are. A true home away from home, but one that actually, and rather gracefully, moves across the face of the deep." These canoes were a perfect marriage of available materials, sophisticated design, and the specific needs of long-distance oceanic voyaging, making them the ideal platforms for the precious cargo and the even more precious navigational knowledge they carried. And, of course, carrying all those people, plants, and provisions required careful planning. Those magnificent double-hulled canoes, marvels of resilient design and profound craftsmanship, were far more than just elegant sailing vessels. They were the arcs of Polynesian expansion, carrying entire communities and the potential for new civilizations across the vast, empty canvas of the Pacific. But to sustain life, hope, and a functioning society for weeks, sometimes even months, adrift on the open ocean required an extraordinary level of foresight, meticulous planning, and ingenious resource management, especially when it came to the fundamental necessities of food and fresh water. Imagine setting out on a journey where the nearest grocery store or freshwater spring might be literally thousands of miles and many weeks away, and there's no guarantee you'll even find it. This was the reality Polynesian voyagers faced. This is a core mainstream historical fact. They embarked on these epic treks with a carefully selected and astonishingly diverse range of transportable foodstuffs. This included preserved items designed for longevity, such as fermented breadfruit, known as masi in some cultures, or used to make poi, which, when properly prepared and stored in leaf-lined pits or bundles, could last for very long periods. Dried fish and sometimes dried meat, along with durable tubers like taro, yams, and sweet potatoes, which could remain edible for months if stored carefully, formed the staples of their seagoing diet. Alongside these preserved rations, they carried fresh provisions like coconuts, which were invaluable as they provided not only nutritious flesh but also, crucially, clean drinking water. And, of course, whenever conditions allowed, they supplemented their supplies by fishing from the canoe and by ingeniously collecting rainwater. The preparation for such a voyage would have been a massive communal undertaking. The fermented breadfruit, for example, involved a lengthy process of peeling, cooking, and then pounding the fruit into a pulp, which was then allowed to ferment, developing a distinctive, somewhat sour taste, but also its remarkable keeping qualities. Fish would be caught in abundance, then gutted, perhaps salted if salt was available from coastal evaporation pans, and meticulously dried in the sun or over smoky fires until it was as tough and durable as leather. Imagine the detailed meal planning that must have gone into this. Right then, crew, for the next 60 exciting days at sea, our carefully curated menu features: Monday, fermented breadfruit surprise; Tuesday, dried fish delight with a side of contemplation about the vastness of the ocean; Wednesday, slightly less fermented breadfruit jubilee, if the weather holds; and for a special treat on Fridays, a single, shared coconut, if we haven't accidentally used it as a football. Gourmet it most certainly wasn't, but it was sustenance, fuel for the paddlers, and the very stuff of survival. Water, even more critical than food, was managed with extreme care. As mentioned, young coconuts provided a vital initial supply of sterile, electrolyte-rich liquid. Beyond that, large gourds, carefully hollowed out and sealed, or lengths of stout bamboo, were filled with fresh water before departure. Rain was a precious gift from the heavens. When a squall approached, sails might be ingeniously rigged or large leaves and mats spread out to channel the fresh rainwater into containers, every drop carefully conserved. Fishing was an ongoing activity. Lines made from strong plant fibers, with hooks meticulously crafted from bone, shell, especially mother-of-pearl for its lure-like shimmer, or hardwood, would be trolled behind the canoe. The catch, perhaps tuna, mahi-mahi, or other pelagic species, would provide welcome fresh protein. A fascinating quirky tidbit from some accounts and modern experimental voyages suggests that in times of real scarcity, voyagers might have consumed specific types of edible seaweed found floating in patches, or even carefully scraped and eaten small marine creatures that attached themselves to the canoe's hull below the waterline, a sort of foraged oceanic snack bar. There might also have been specific rituals or disciplined practices for conserving water, such as sharing portions carefully, or even licking morning dew off the surfaces of the canoe, ensuring absolutely nothing was wasted. But these voyages, especially the great migratory ones, weren't just about sustaining the crew. They were about transplanting a culture. The canoes carried a veritable floating garden and a miniature farm. Carefully wrapped taro corms, breadfruit saplings, sweet potato cuttings, sugar-cane sections, and starts of other essential plants like pandanus for weaving and paper mulberry for tapa cloth were stowed aboard. And, of course, they brought their domestic animals. Pigs, chickens, and dogs, the Polynesian triumvirate of portable protein and companionship. The precise caloric intake and nutritional balance maintained by crews on these extremely long voyages, and the actual extent to which they could realistically rely on day-to-day fishing versus their meticulously stored provisions, particularly when traversing less biologically productive oceanic regions or during prolonged periods of storms when fishing was impossible, is still a subject of careful research, ongoing study, and some considered conjecture, often informed by ethnographic analogy and the practical experiences of modern replica voyages. The chickens and pigs on board, one imagines, probably had rather mixed feelings about the whole enterprise. Oh, wonderful, a thoughtful pig might have mused. A long, all-inclusive sea voyage, blue skies, fresh air. Oh, hang on a minute. Are we the esteemed in-flight meal on this trip? Or are we destined to become the revered founding members of a brand new island society? The suspense, from their perspective, must have been truly terrible. Or perhaps mouth-wateringly delicious, depending on which day of the voyage it happened to be. The leader of the expedition, often the navigator themselves, would have been responsible for the strict rationing and careful management of all these precious supplies. Every item was accounted for, every portion measured by necessity. There was likely a deep psychological comfort in these provisions too, the taste of familiar foods far from home, the living presence of the plants and animals that represented their heritage and their future, a tangible link to the land they had left and the new land they sought. It was a zero-waste economy born of necessity. Every part of a plant or animal, every drop of water, had a purpose and a value. You certainly couldn't just casually pop down to the non-existent corner shop if you suddenly ran out of coconuts in the middle of the Pacific. Resource management wasn't just a skill. It was an extreme sport, a matter of life and death. Right? Who on earth used the last carefully preserved breadfruit for an impromptu pillow fight? That was designated as next Tuesday's dinner, and our primary hope for establishing a new, thriving breadfruit orchard on whatever island we happened to find. The incredible foresight and logistical planning involved in provisioning these transoceanic voyages are as impressive as the navigational skills themselves. It was this ability to sustain themselves, to carry their world with them, that allowed Polynesian culture to spread across such a vast liquid continent. This very practical, life-sustaining aspect of the journey was also deeply intertwined with its spiritual dimension, with the beliefs and rituals that gave meaning and courage to those who embarked on these audacious treks into the unknown. The meticulous planning of provisions, the ingenious ways of sustaining life for months on end aboard those resilient voyaging canoes, speaks volumes about the practical genius of Polynesian cultures. But these epic journeys across the vast Pacific were never solely about logistics and survival. They were profoundly spiritual undertakings, imbued with ancient rituals, sacred chants, and a deep, abiding respect for the powerful forces of the ocean and the cosmos. The wayfinder was not only a master of environmental observation and mental calculation but often also a priest or spiritual expert, guiding the voyage on both a physical and metaphysical plane. This is a central mainstream historical fact that illuminates the worldview of these seafarers. Polynesian voyaging was deeply interwoven with spiritual beliefs and practices. Numerous complex rituals, heartfelt prayers, and ancient, rhythmic chants were performed by the navigators and crew. These were intended to invoke the protection and guidance of the gods and revered ancestors, to ensure favorable winds and calm seas, to divine the location of land, and, crucially, to maintain a harmonious, respectful relationship with the often unpredictable and overwhelmingly powerful forces of the natural world, particularly the ocean itself. This wasn't just a case of pack some extra dried fish and hope for the best. Oh no, this was more like, pack the extra dried fish, meticulously prepare the sacred offering for Tangaroa, mighty god of the ocean, reverently chant to your great-great-great-grandfather's guiding spirit for a little directional assistance. Ensure all personal tapu, sacred prohibitions, are being strictly observed, and then hope for the best. A significantly more comprehensive and spiritually robust travel plan, you'll agree. The ocean, Te Moana Nui Akiwa, was not seen as an empty void to be conquered, but as a sacred realm, a living entity, the domain of powerful deities like Tangaroa or Kanaloa, depending on the specific island group, who govern the winds, waves, and creatures of the deep. Ancestral spirits, the Aumakua in Hawaiian belief, were also thought to travel with the canoe, offering guidance and protection if properly venerated. Chants were therefore an indispensable part of the wayfinder's toolkit. Some chants, as we've touched upon, were powerful mnemonic devices, encoding vast amounts of navigational information, star courses, island locations, swell patterns. Others were invocations, prayers set to rhythm and melody, designed to calm storms, to summon favorable winds, to give courage to the crew during times of hardship, or to clarify the navigator's mind, allowing them to better perceive the subtle signs around them. Imagine the sound of those chants rolling out across the gentle waves on a starlit night, the deep voices of the crew rising and falling in unison, a hypnotic, resonant connection to the ancestral past and the spiritual powers that governed their journey. Rituals and offerings were also commonplace. Before setting out, ceremonies would be held to consecrate the canoe and seek blessings for the voyage. During the journey, offerings, perhaps kava, a ceremonial drink, portions of food, a prized feather, or other valued items, might be given to the sea, cast upon the waters to appease the ocean gods and ensure their continued goodwill. Upon successful landfall, further rituals of thanksgiving would be performed. A fascinating quirky tidbit is the belief that certain parts of the canoe itself might have been considered particularly sacred or tapu, perhaps the navigator's special seat or the carved figures on the bow or stern. These areas might require specific behaviors or offerings when approached or touched. Some traditions even hint that highly skilled navigators, through intense chanting and meditation, could sometimes enter a trance-like state, allowing them to better commune with the spiritual realm or to heighten their intuitive navigational senses, perceiving things beyond the normal reach of the five senses. Others believed that the very wood used in the canoe's construction, or the senet lashings that bound it, held their own spirits and were listening to the progress of the voyage. The navigator, in this context, often acted as a crucial spiritual intermediary, a conduit between the human world and the realm of gods and spirits. It was their responsibility to interpret omens, to ensure all necessary rituals were correctly performed, and to maintain the proper spiritual balance that was deemed essential for a safe and successful voyage. The precise nature and uniformity of specific deities primarily associated with navigation across all the diverse Polynesian cultures, and the exact extent to which all ritual practices were standardized versus being highly localized and adapted by individual navigators or distinct schools of wayfinding, remains an area of rich ongoing anthropological and ethno-historical investigation. The Pacific is vast, and so too was the beautiful diversity of its cultural expressions. Imagine trying to explain to Kanaloa, the formidable god of the deep ocean and all its mysterious creatures, that you unfortunately forgot his customary offering of perfectly ripe bananas because you were far too busy trying to get a decent signal to update your social media story. The Wi-Fi out there was, as we can imagine, legendarily terrible anyway, but the resulting divine displeasure, probably significantly worse, and likely to involve some rather unpleasantly large waves and a distinct lack of cooperative fish. Best, by far, to keep the gods happy and the offerings flowing. This spiritual worldview fostered a profound respect for the ocean and all its creatures. They were not just resources to be exploited, but kin, fellow beings within a shared, sacred cosmos. This deep ecological connection undoubtedly contributed to their sustainable practices and their acute observational skills. These beliefs also provided immense psychological resilience. Facing the dangers of the open ocean storms, becoming the fear of getting lost, required extraordinary courage and fortitude. The shared rituals, the belief in ancestral guidance and divine protection, would have forged powerful bonds among the crew, fostering social cohesion and a collective will to persevere. Each voyage could be seen as a reenactment of the epic journeys of their ancestors, a sacred quest, or even a participation in the ongoing creative acts of the gods. Their pre-voyage checklist, one might humorously imagine, would have looked something like this. Coconuts for water and food? Check. Carefully dried fish and preserved breadfruit? Check. Navigational stars memorized and mental compass aligned? Check. Sacred chants to ensure the canoe doesn't spontaneously decide to become an experimental submarine? Double, triple check. And, maybe pack a spare steering paddle just in case the chants are a tiny bit rusty that particular week. This spiritual dimension was not separate from their practical skills. It was inextricably woven into the very fabric of their navigational knowledge and their way of life. It provided the meaning, the motivation, and much of the inner strength that underpinned their incredible achievements, transforming a perilous journey into a sacred passage. And among the more tangible, yet still enigmatic tools that sometimes bridged this practical and symbolic divide were the fascinating stick charts. The spiritual depth and communal dedication that surrounded Polynesian voyaging were the unseen currents beneath the surface of their incredible journeys. Alongside the chants that resonated on the gentle waves and the rituals that sanctified their endeavors, we find, particularly in the Marshall Islands of Micronesia, though with conceptual echoes relevant to our broader discussion of Pacific wayfinding, one of the most tangible and fascinating, yet somewhat enigmatic tools of oceanic navigation, the stick charts. These were not maps in the way you might typically envision them, with coastlines and compass roses, but rather abstract representations of the ocean's dynamic character. This is a key mainstream historical fact. These unique cartographic devices, known as meadow, rebelib, or matong depending on their specific type and purpose, were meticulously constructed from the midribs of coconut fronds or strips of pandanus root. These slender sticks were then tied together with sennit, that ever-useful coconut husk fiber, to form a framework. Small cowrie shells, or sometimes pieces of coral, were then lashed onto this framework at specific junctures. The genius of these charts lies in what they depicted. Not landmasses in a pictorial sense, but primarily the patterns of ocean swells, how they moved, how they interacted, and crucially, how they bent, refracted, or reflected when they encountered islands or chains of islands, presented by the shells. They were, in essence, diagrams of the ocean's energy, maps of its invisible rhythmic topography. It's important to note that these were primarily used as training and mnemonic aids on land, a way to teach and remember complex wave patterns, rather than being taken out on the canoe like a modern chart. If you were to show one of these intricate constructions to a European cartographer of, say, the 18th or 19th century, they'd likely scratch their powdered wig in utter bewilderment and exclaim, "Good heavens, is this some sort of highly avant-garde macrame project? Or perhaps a very abstract representation of a particularly unlucky spider that's had a rather unfortunate encounter with a fishing net?" They were, and are, a completely different way of perceiving, conceptualizing, and recording the dynamic realities of the ocean world. The way these stick charts are understood to work is that the straight sticks often represent the direction of dominant, prevailing ocean swells. Curved sticks would then illustrate how these swells bend as they approach an island or pass between two islands. The points where sticks intersect, or where shells are placed, indicate areas where swells converge, creating zones of confused seas, or they mark the location of an island itself, whose presence disrupts the otherwise orderly march of the waves. Different types of charts served different purposes. The matong, for instance, was often a smaller, more generalized chart used to teach the fundamental principles of how swells interact with an island, a sort of abstract textbook example. The meadow and rebelib, on the other hand, were larger and more complex, representing actual specific swathes of ocean, depicting the relative locations of islands and the characteristic swell patterns around them for a particular group of atolls or a known voyaging route. A particularly intriguing quirky tidbit about these charts is that each one was often a highly individualized creation, a unique physical manifestation of a specific navigator's personal understanding and experience of a particular sea area. What one navigator encoded in their chart might be almost unintelligible to another navigator unless it was carefully explained, symbol by symbol, relationship by relationship. They weren't standardized, mass-produced maps, but deeply personal memory aids, tactile diagrams of a lifetime of oceanic observation. Some scholars also suggest that learning to read or understand a stick chart involved not just visual interpretation but also a tactile understanding, running one's fingers along the sticks, feeling the angles and the relationships between the components to internalize the wave patterns physically. Their primary role, as far as we understand, was as powerful teaching tools. An experienced navigator would use a stick chart on shore to explain to apprentices how swells behave, how to anticipate the changes in wave patterns that signal an unseen island, and how to orient oneself using these dynamic clues. It allowed students to visualize these complex three-dimensional interactions in a simplified, two-dimensional form before they had to decipher them in the often confusing reality of the open ocean. The precise extent to which all the individual elements on every stick chart can be definitively and uniquely correlated with specific, measurable oceanographic phenomena, like precise wave heights or periods, versus representing more abstract, localized, or even somewhat idealized knowledge, and furthermore, whether similar conceptual mapping tools might have existed in other parts of Polynesia but were perhaps made of more perishable materials that haven't survived, or were purely mental constructs rather than physical artifacts, naturally remains a subject of ongoing scholarly inquiry and fascination. These certainly weren't tools you'd casually unfold on the pitching deck of your canoe in the middle of a stiff breeze and a bit of a sea spray. Oops, there goes swell pattern number 3. Dear me. And I rather think the shell representing Rarotonga just blew overboard and is now heading for Fiji. They were clearly designed for careful study and quiet contemplation in a calm, dry place, preferably with a knowledgeable elder patiently pointing out the subtle significance of each stick and shell. Stick charts represent a profoundly different kind of cartography, not static and pictorial, focusing on the fixed outlines of land, but dynamic and experiential, capturing the invisible forces and rhythmic patterns of the ocean itself. They are a beautiful testament to the human ability to conceptualize and represent complex environmental interactions in diverse and ingenious ways. The abstract patterns of the sticks and shells formed a bridge between the navigator's deeply embodied, sensory knowledge of the sea and the need to transmit that knowledge to the next generation. Their intricate, almost sculptural beauty as artifacts belies the immense depth of oceanic understanding they encode. Imagine trying to use one of these intricate diagrams to find your way to the local supermarket. Right then, according to this, if I carefully follow the dominant shopping trolley swell down aisle 5, and then watch for the reflected desire pattern emanating from the vicinity of the biscuit aisle, I should, with any luck, find the checkout tills. It really is all about context, isn't it? These enigmatic charts, born from a deep intimacy with the ocean's rhythms, stand as a testament to the sophisticated intellectual traditions of Pacific Islanders. A reminder that there are many ways to map and understand our world. They embody the very essence of the wayfinder's art, transforming subtle, often invisible, environmental cues into a reliable path across the sea. A skill exemplified by the legendary figures who navigated these waters. Those enigmatic stick charts, with their elegant, abstract lines and carefully placed shells, offer us a glimpse into the complex wayfinding knowledge system. But it was the navigators themselves, the lore keepers and sea path sharers, who truly embodied this profound understanding. Their incredible journeys, their wisdom, and their courage became the stuff of legend. Their stories whispered on the gentle night breezes and chanted to the rhythm of the paddling canoe, passed down through generations like precious, sea-smoothed heirlooms. These are not typically tales of grand, clamorous battles or ostentatious displays of power, but more often understated accounts of remarkable skill, quiet determination, and a deep, harmonious connection with the ocean world. This is a well-established mainstream historical fact. Rich oral traditions throughout Polynesia recount the epic voyages of numerous named navigator chiefs, culture heroes, and intrepid explorers. Figures like Cup, who, in many Maori traditions, is credited with the discovery of Aotearoa, New Zealand, or Moika, a famous chief and navigator known for his extensive voyages between Tahiti and Hawaii, are celebrated for their exceptional seafaring abilities, their courage in venturing into the unknown, and their wisdom in establishing new communities or maintaining vital links between existing ones. These narratives, often poetic and filled with vivid imagery, served not only to entertain but also to educate, to preserve historical memory, and to inspire. Let's imagine, for a moment, the story of Cup as it's gently retold. Picture him not as a fierce conqueror, but as a profoundly observant man, driven by curiosity or perhaps a quest. The legends often speak of him following a specific sign, perhaps a mythical creature, or a unique bird, or a persistent current, far out into the uncharted ocean. He would have used all the skills we've discussed, reading the stars as they wheeled above his canoe, interpreting the subtle language of the ocean swells, noting the flight paths of birds that eventually led him towards a new, mist-shrouded land. His arrival in Aotearoa is often portrayed as a careful, considered exploration, a dialogue with the new environment, naming its features, and then returning to his homeland of Hawaii to tell of his discovery, providing the sailing directions for those who would follow. These weren't usually guys who needed a 5-star TripAdvisor review and a detailed Lonely Planet guide to find a promising new spot. They just sort of sensed it with every fiber of their being. Cup might have calmly mused. That particular stationary cloud formation looks rather interesting. The swell pattern has a curious reflective bounce in that direction, and my left knee is distinctly telling me there's a significant lack of truly monstrous, canoe-eating squid over yonder. Let's go and have a peaceful, observant look, shall we? And then, lo and behold, a magnificent new habitable landmass. Or consider the voyages of a figure like Moika, a high chief from Tahiti who, according to Hawaiian traditions, made the arduous journey north to Hawaii. Later, missing his homeland, he is said to have sent his own adopted son, Kila, on an equally challenging return voyage to Tahiti to fetch Moiko's biological son, Lamakahiki. These stories emphasize not just the discovery of new lands, but the incredible precision of navigation required to maintain contact between distant island groups, to make repeated, successful landfalls across thousands of miles of open ocean. It speaks of a navigational system so refined that specific, relatively small island targets could be found and refound with confidence. These understated legends reinforced vital cultural values: courage in the face of the unknown, the importance of keen observation, deep respect for the natural and spiritual worlds, and the wisdom of patient, methodical exploration. A fascinating quirky tidbit often found woven into these tales is the attribution of almost supernatural abilities to the greatest wayfinders. Some were said to be able to call favorable winds with powerful chance, to see islands that were still hundreds of miles beyond the horizon through sheer force of will or spiritual insight, or even to communicate with specific sea creatures, perhaps a guiding shark or a friendly whale, that would lead them safely to their destination. While these elements may be poetic or metaphorical embellishments, they underscore the immense respect accorded to these individuals and the belief that their profound attunement to the ocean bordered on the magical. Their mana, their spiritual power and efficacy, was believed to be so strong it could calm a stormy sea or offer an almost tangible shield of protection around the canoe. The precise historicity of some of the most ancient legendary voyagers, and the exact, unadorned details of their initial voyages, attempting to distinguish later mythological embellishment from a verifiable kernel of historical truth, naturally remain complex and intriguing questions that scholars, archaeologists, linguists, and cultural historians continue to grapple with, using a sophisticated combination of comparative mythology, linguistic analysis of place names, archaeological dating, of settlements, and even genetic studies. You generally don't see many surviving ancient statues depicting famous Polynesian navigators looking terribly stressed, anxiously consulting a crumpled, water-stained chart and biting their nails. No, Their legends usually portray them as possessing an almost preternatural calm, an all-knowing serenity, and probably remarkably excellent posture from all those years of serene, balanced canoe sitting. They were, in many ways, the ultimate chill adventurers of the ancient world. These figures served as powerful role models, their stories a constant reminder of the skill, endurance, and deep faith that had brought their people to their island homes. This ancestral connection provided a powerful sense of identity and continuity. Indeed, the legacy of these ancient wayfinders resonates even into modern times, beautifully exemplified by the renaissance of traditional Polynesian voyaging, with modern canoes like the crackle successfully navigating vast oceanic distances using only these ancient techniques, often guided by modern masters like the late Pielug from Satawal, who carried on this unbroken chain of knowledge. Their version of an epic, spellbinding blockbuster movie, if you can imagine it, probably involved a very long, captivating, single-shot scene of a revered navigator just calmly, silently, observing a complex swell pattern for hours on end, followed by a quiet, almost imperceptible nod and a softly uttered aha. And everyone in the assembled audience, understanding the profound implications, would collectively gasp at the sheer brilliance and understated drama of it all. Different times, different cultural thrills, perhaps. These soothing legends on the waves, then, are more than just charming old stories. They are the human embodiment of all the intricate skills and deep wisdom we've been exploring: the star compasses, the swell readings, the intuitive course plotting, the spiritual connection. They tell of real people, or at least figures rooted in real traditions, who mastered the art of being at home in the vastness of the sea, transforming the great ocean from a barrier into a series of interconnected pathways, and in doing so wove together the vibrant tapestry of Polynesian culture that stretches across the Pacific. And as their journeys reached their conclusions, so too does our story begin to draw to its gentle close, reflecting on the enduring echoes of these ancient skills. And so, these soothing legends on the waves, these tales of calm competence and profound connection, carry us towards the end of our own gentle journey tonight. They remind us that the art of Polynesian wayfinding was not merely a collection of clever techniques, but a holistic way of being, a deep embodiment of knowledge passed through generations, a testament to human ingenuity in harmonious dialogue with the vast Pacific. But what became of this extraordinary heritage, these subtle secrets whispered by the stars and swells? For a period, as the modern world with its new technologies and different priorities made its inevitable inroads into the Pacific, it seemed as though these ancient arts, this intricate understanding of the ocean's subtle language, might fade into the mists of memory. The roar of engines began to replace the quiet rustle of pandanus sails, and the unerring precision of satellite navigation understandably overshadowed the patient observation of wave patterns and celestial bodies. The unbroken chain of master-to-apprentice transmission, which had endured for millennia, began to fray in many places. The knowledge became endangered, a precious treasure at risk of being lost to time. But then, a remarkable thing happened. This is a truly inspiring mainstream historical fact. The latter half of the 20th century witnessed a powerful cultural renaissance across Polynesia, a reawakening of pride in ancestral traditions, and with it, a dedicated movement to revive the lost arts of long-distance voyaging and non-instrument navigation. A pivotal moment in this resurgence was the building of the crackle, a performance-accurate replica of a traditional Hawaiian double-hulled voyaging canoe, which first sailed in 1975. Its subsequent successful voyages, particularly the 1976 voyage to Tahiti and back navigated without instruments, were monumental achievements. This revival owed an immeasurable debt to a quiet, humble master from the Micronesian island of Satawal, the late Pielug, one of the last fully initiated traditional Pacific navigators, who generously agreed to share his ancestral knowledge with the Polynesian Voyaging Society, effectively breathing life back into a tradition that was on the brink. For a while there, it seemed like the most advanced piece of surviving Polynesian navigation might just become knowing how to expertly program the GPS on a charter fishing boat for tourists. Thankfully, some incredibly dedicated, visionary folks decided that simply wouldn't do. They metaphorically rolled up their sleeves and said, "Hold my coconut water. We're rebuilding an ancient voyaging canoe from scratch, and then we're going to find Tahiti the old-fashioned way, using nothing but the wisdom of our ancestors." And, astonishingly, they did. The impact of these revival voyages has been profound, rippling outwards far beyond the shores of Hawaii. They have inspired new generations across the Pacific to reconnect with their seafaring heritage, to learn the stars, the swells, the winds, and the ways of the canoe. It has been a journey of immense challenges, piecing together fragmented historical accounts, earning the trust of knowledge holders, and then putting that ancient wisdom into practice on the vast, unforgiving ocean. A lovely quirky tidbit from this modern voyaging era is that the replica canoes often carry a meticulous scientist's log, alongside the navigator's traditional oral recitations and observations. This allows for a fascinating, direct comparison and often a stunning validation of the ancient techniques using modern scientific instruments, beautifully blending old and new ways of knowing and demonstrating the profound accuracy of the traditional methods. Some modern wayfinders also speak of feeling a deep, almost genetic, connection to their ancestors when they are out on the ocean, guided only by the stars and swells, a powerful sense of continuity. The global voyages of canoes like Klee have also played a crucial role in raising international awareness of indigenous knowledge systems, the importance of cultural heritage, and the urgent need for sustainable practices. In our relationship with the environment, the extent to which modern reconstructed voyages can perfectly replicate all aspects and inherent challenges of ancient Polynesian voyaging, given inevitable differences in available traditional materials, the cultural contexts from which modern crews are drawn, and that vast, almost subconscious, baseline knowledge of the Pacific environment that ancient navigators would have possessed through many generations of continuous, unbroken tradition, is, of course, a point of thoughtful academic consideration and ongoing refinement within the dedicated voyaging community itself. Imagine the patience of Maupielug, a true master steeped in 1,000 years of accumulated tradition, calmly explaining to his eager, intelligent students, "No, my friends, you don't tap the sacred port hull 3 times with a ceremonial paddle to magically activate the star compass feature. You just look, and you feel, and you listen, and you remember, for about 20 or 30 years. Then it becomes clear. The learning curve was undoubtedly incredibly steep, requiring immense dedication, but the rewards, the rekindling of a cultural fire, the restoration of pride, the deep connection to the ancestors have been immeasurable. So, the next time your sophisticated phone map app unexpectedly fails you in the middle of nowhere, maybe don't immediately descend into a spiral of existential panic. Just take a deep, calming breath, perhaps find a comfortable spot to sit for a moment, and try to feel the direction of the nearest dominant atmospheric or emotional swell. Or, perhaps just ask a friendly local for directions. But it's undeniably nice and deeply reassuring to know that the ancient options for finding one's way were so incredibly cool, so profoundly connected, and so beautifully human. The soothing secrets of the Polynesian wayfinders are not just historical curiosities. They represent a living, breathing wisdom, a testament to the extraordinary capacity of humankind to observe, to understand, and to navigate our world with grace and ingenuity. And as our exploration of these gentle ocean swells and their ancient secrets draws to a close for tonight, allow your mind to drift with the images we've conjured. Feel the vast, starlit expanse of the Pacific cradling you, the rhythmic lift and fall of the unseen canoe beneath, a gentle rocking motion that soothes and calms, the voices of the navigators, the soft chants on the waves, the whisper of the wind in the pandanus sail. These are the ancient echoes that have traveled through time to lull you into a state of peaceful repose. There is nothing more for you to do now, nothing to solve, nothing to hold on to. Just the gentle rhythm of your own breath, aligning with the deep, slow pulse of that ancient ocean. The journey was long, the challenges met with quiet wisdom and skill, and now, rest is deserved. Let the subtle beauty of this ancestral knowledge, the quiet competence of those who read the stars and the sea, be a comforting presence as you drift deeper and deeper into a serene and restorative sleep. The canoe sails on in the dreamtime, guided by silent stars, towards an island of perfect tranquility, and you are safe, you are peaceful, you are ready to rest.